Let me start by stating clearly that what we saw and what we observed happened in Minneapolis with Mr. Floyd's death is something that troubles us all. In fact, it angers us and outrages us. It causes great outrage among the law enforcement community. I haven't spoke with any of my peers or colleagues that haven't shared this level of disappointment, frustration, and anger regarding this type of incident happening. Given that, we also recognize that no agency is immune from use of force challenges. The San Mateo Police Department has experienced its own challenges when it comes to use of force. And frankly, it would be irresponsible for anybody to guarantee that we're not going to run into similar circumstances in the future. However, it would be just as irresponsible to not seek every avenue available to us to prevent this from ever happening again. Now, in response to this incident, as you can imagine, we've received a great deal of inquiry about the level of training and whether or not an incident that happened in Minnesota could occur in the city of San Mateo or the Bay Area. A lot of these questions have focused on our training. And I want to assure you that the San Mateo Police Department, and I'm confident in working with our neighbors, provides the highest level of training to its officers when it comes to de-escalation, use of force, implicit bias, recognizing bias, and fair and equitable policing. Training is important to us as a state, as a county, and in San Mateo as a police department. Even with that level of training, cops, police officers are human beings and prone to making mistakes like everybody else. However, I want to make it very, very clear. What happened in Minneapolis and in some of the other instances that we've talked about was not a mistake. Rather, it's something that speaks to integrity and character. And frankly, character and integrity are things that are often unable to be taught and are part of a person's individual makeup and background. So how do we address that? How do we deal with issues and circumstances that can't simply be taught in a classroom? Well, there's a few ways that we as a police department, along with other law enforcement agencies, try to take steps to ensure that we are addressing those issues early on, and it starts with the hiring process. As many can imagine, and I'm sure many have heard the stories, becoming a police officer is no easy task. Not only does it take a great deal of perseverance and sometimes luck and being in the right place at the right time, giving the number of jobs that are available compared to those that are interested. A prospective applicant also navigates through an incredibly selective and strict vetting process. The background investigation is something that's thorough and complete, includes a psychological test, a medical test, and even a polygraph examination. Now, that's just part of the story when it comes to selecting police officers. Here in San Mateo, we're fortunate to have both a diverse and well-educated police force. And when I talk about diversity, I am talking about a diverse makeup when it comes to race. It comes to, when you look at our officers, you're going to see a diverse group, and that's good. I'm proud of that. But what I'm just as proud of is the diversity that comes from the diverse backgrounds and experiences that our officers have. Regardless of the color of their skin, sometimes we're seeking individuals who have a strong background, a strong life experience that bring that to our organization to better serve the public. We're not looking to be an echo chamber. We don't want someone to enter our ranks that's going to just blindly share ideas and not have a mind of their own and a sense of right and wrong that defines that character integrity that we talk about. So when I talk about diversity, I talk about much more than what we traditionally talk about. All of those components make up a well-rounded human being at the end of the day that we're looking for to serve the public. In addition to hiring, the focus on a level of integrity, a level of care and compassion for the community must be an ongoing emphasis within any successful police department. And having been fairly new here, I was pleased and excited to walk into an environment where I immediately observed that care for the community, that care and dedication to service. It makes my job a little bit easier, but on the other hand, it makes it much more difficult. The bar is high here in San Mateo, and it's my job to maintain that high bar regarding the level of service that we provide to the community. But this conversation is much more about training. It's much more about hiring practices. It's much more about vetting out those candidates that may not be appropriate for this line of work. We face difficult challenges now, and we face difficult challenges for a long time that may take a great deal of time and effort to work through. There are likely no answers on the immediate horizon, and it's going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get through this and make real progress. Conversations like this are just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. And I look forward to. I'm hopeful that the response is positive to this format. However, I'd love to do it in person in the not too distant future, so that we can continue these conversations and really get down to what's important and discuss some real issues.
If the same situation that happened in Minneapolis, the same tragic situation that happened there, happened here in San Mateo, do you feel that your police officers' training would have made a different outcome here in the city?
Absolutely. Not only training, but philosophy, approach in how we serve the community, a culture that promotes a care and responsibility to the community. And I say that twofold. One is the act by the officer that committed this act, himself. I think our training would be just the first step in preventing an act like that. And clearly, we don't train or teach our officers to do anything like that, and it would be so foreign and outside the realm of what we teach that I would not foresee that happening in our environment. The second is, and it's been talked about a couple times here, are the 3 officers that were there with that officer. Although it may not be. It may not violate any legal statute, as DA Wagstaff has articulated. As a police officer, as a human being, I have it's my interpretation, or it's my feeling, that I have a moral obligation to step in and interfere when I see something like that happening. And I know that I'm confident in our officers in this department, not only in the San Mateo Police Department, but throughout the county. It's been my experience during the last 25 years that if I saw an officer acting in that manner, or if other officers that I've worked with throughout the course of my career had observed that behavior, that they would step in and intervene. And frankly, not to that extent, but I've experienced that. I've experienced, police officers are human beings. People have tempers. People have good days and they have bad days. And I think that we recognize that in our coworkers, because that, and we, especially when we spend so much time together, when somebody's not on top of their game or having a bad day, and it's beholden on all of us to recognize that and step in to make sure that the right thing is done. It was mentioned before that we ask our police officers to do a very difficult job. We often hire people at a very young age, where their life experience is not what it would be when they reach the ripe old age that I'm at now. And we ask them to make decisions based on a limited level of experience. And I'm not talking about just law enforcement experience. I value life experience more than I just value the time that you spend wearing a uniform. So I think there's 2 answers to that question, and both those answers are that I think the outcome would be extremely different, not only in the San Mateo Police Department, but I'm confident of that with our surrounding departments in the area, knowing how professional they are. That I could not imagine seeing an officer act in that manner, and B, I could not see his fellow officers allowing that to occur.
The feelings I had when I first saw the video, Mike, as I was frustrated, angry, very similar feelings that Chief Barberini had. I was also very sad for Mr. Floyd's family and him, and it was absolutely a horrible video. No officer I have spoke to feels any different than I have. That being said, everybody I've spoken to about this in my association, they realize that this incident and incidents like it have really done damage to the relationship that police officers across the nation have with their communities, and we're not immune to that here. We know that the faith that the community has in us as a police department is the bedrock on what we build our success as a law enforcement agency upon. So without that trust, without that faith in us, this department would not be as successful as it has been in the past. We're, you know, a top tier agency, and you see other police departments that don't have the faith of the community behind them, and they don't nearly do the type of professional work and have the kind of results that we do. So we're very appreciative of the relationship that we do have with this community, and our officers are very aware of the fact that, you know, it's been damaged, and that we are also very committed to repairing that by engaging with the community, doing what we need to do to get back to that level of trust that we've enjoyed before.
We are valued as police officers. We love our community, and first and foremost, in talking with other officers, my fellow officers on a day-to-day, we are all saddened. We are all moved by the video as a reminder that we are, as law enforcement, the most visible branch of the government. And when that fails, or when that harms individual members of our society, especially members of our society that feel that their voices are not heard, the impact is not only great, it ends up being something that we can get to the point where it's irreparable. And right now we're at a crisis point, whether or not we want to admit that so much in those words, but we're at a crisis point. Our reputation is in danger by the actions of a few. I know for a fact that I'm proud to serve with the people that shared this patch with me. The man to my right was my primary FTO. I work alongside people of various backgrounds, various different cultural identities, and we all come together here to serve this greater good. I know for me, in the last few days, I have had members, particularly African-American people, come towards me and talk to me and want to have a dialogue about what's going on. They see me in the uniform, and some of them have said, you know, I know you have a hard role right now, and some of them have expressed anger and frustration. And it's been eye-opening for me. It's been challenging, and it's also still rewarding, because I know that we're doing good work. I know that we do not stand for injustice. I know that we stand against all of those things that have happened, and we're here for our community.
This is such an important conversation for all of us to be having right now in the wake of George Floyd's murder. This is an absolutely crucial conversation for us to be having. All of us need to understand the lived experience, not only of George Floyd, but of all African Americans in the United States. Understanding that lived experience means more than just paying attention this week. It means every day. There are lots of people who live in fear and who don't have trust, and it's on us to build that trust with the community. I'm constantly asking myself, is the city council representative of our residents, of our community? How do we better reflect the community that we serve? Are we doing that as a council? Are we doing that on our commissions? Are we doing that in our day-to-day life? Making sure that our city is serving all of its residents in every aspect of our community is crucial. So it is absolutely incumbent on me as the mayor and as a member of the city council to recruit people into our city services academy so that we can better reflect the city that we serve in the best way possible.
In San Mateo County, when anytime there is an officer in this county, officer or a deputy sheriff, or any law enforcement officer engages in the use of force that results in harm to a citizen, it is not investigated by the law enforcement agency for the criminal purposes. That is the role of the district attorney. When we get the report that somebody has been, whether it's a shooting or a use of a force of some sort, whatever it may be. Last year we had, a year and a half ago, we had numerous taser cases. We immediately do the investigation. Obviously, the local law enforcement agency is involved because they have to do their internal affairs investigation. But whether it was a criminal use of force or a lawful use of force by the officer is done by us. I have a team that responds. I have a Chief Inspector, John Warren, who responds to all of these, every one of them. And he brings his team out. It's usually between 6 and 8 investigators of my office. Most of these investigators did come from local law enforcement before they joined my office, but we never allow one of my agents to be involved in an investigation if that was his original agency. We are striving for independence. We will conduct the investigation working with the San Mateo County Forensic Laboratory, if it's a death, with the coroner's office, and we do all the witness interviews, and we will interview the officer or officers that are involved in the event. The goal we have is to investigate it as we would any crime, any incident, to determine, did a crime occur? We do want to interview the officers. Officers are like any other citizen. They have a right to speak or not speak to us. They have a right to an attorney before they speak to us. In this county over the years, and easily well over 90% of the cases, the officers do choose to speak to us, be interviewed by us. Those interviews are always recorded. They are always video recorded, available for others. We then put the entire collection of evidence together, and then my team, strictly within my office, there's no outside people when they sit down, and my team of investigators and prosecutors will give me counsel on whether we think the law was complied with or whether there was a violation of the law. We will make that decision. I will prepare a letter that I sign, that I send to the agency, advising whether I found it to be a proper use of force, an improper use of force, or perhaps an improper use of force, but not enough that we will be able to obtain a conviction. The decision I'm making is whether a crime occurred, the same as I do on every case that exists in this county, whether it be robbery, homicide, whatever it may be. We always make that. But there is one thing different in these cases, because we do view these cases, and these are the only cases out of all the 20,000 cases we review every year and make our charging and prosecutorial decision. Every single document that I read in making my decision, and usually this will be hundreds, if not thousands of pages of reports, every single one of those at the end, we make available to the public. They can come in and view everything. They get to come in, anybody who wants, any member of the public can come in and view any videos that we have, whatever it may be. We will make it available because these cases are in a unique status. This is where society has entrusted to law enforcement the power to use force, to use deadly force in certain circumstances. And because of that, we feel that the public has a right to review what the decision is.
You know, before I go into kind of what we have really the opportunity to work with you guys on, I want to just say that I think that the message here is one of trying to figure out how best to get at the root causes of a problem that is very much systemic in, you know, our day-to-day lives and the things that we deal with. And those of us who are blessed enough to be a part of this profession have realized for a very long time. And so with the tragic events that have happened in Minnesota, along with all the many other horrible events that have happened over the past couple of years with the negative interactions with African Americans and various police departments, my hope is that we see this as an opportunity to face the reality of our situations and look for opportunities for change. As we think about how we do better, and to kind of dovetail into your question, one of the ways I think we can create more trust within the community is very much similar to the program that you are running with us here in San Mateo. This city has shown a commitment to finding ways to divert young people from the juvenile justice system, which ultimately diverts them from the criminal system down the road. The program really is focused on trying to find early opportunities for intervention spaces. One of the things I think that we do really well in our collaborative space is to not only pull in law enforcement people, but really frankly to pull in people from the community who know our young people best and can focus and really kind of help to move them in a positive place. I think that the diversion program that the department and the city runs is very culturally aware and proficient in relation to the community that it serves. And honestly, I see it as a model for what can be done in other places, not only in our county, but throughout our state. So the focus really is about trying to figure out how do we keep young people out the system. While I really am proud of the services that we provide in probation, I recognize, and the data shows, that young people who never entered the system at all are far more likely to be successful, to move forward, to have some more successful educational outcomes, have more successful social outcomes down the road. And as we think about how do we improve our community and our community relationships, I think a huge step is, quite frankly, having less people who are in the system in the first place, which prevents and hopefully allows for better overall relationships between community members and officers as a whole. I'm here in our county to try to develop not only programs that we know work just because it was anecdotal, but also we've looked at focusing on evidence-based practices and emerging practices. We know that restorative justice programs have success rates. We've seen the work in restorative justice spaces actually really have really profound results in our school districts. When we think about the, what's called the school to prison pipeline, a huge part of kind of derailing that kind of process is how you address school-based discipline. And so while we've seen recidivism go down dramatically for young people and adults, quite frankly, in our county for a while now, we think that a lot of that is due to this cohesive process by which, the county programs or the county partners work closely with CBOs. And so every year we partner directly with CBOs utilizing state funds for prevention work. There's also a stream of funding for CBOs to work with young people who are juvenile justice involved. Our role as the kind of county or government beneficiary is to kind of monitor those people, make sure that the programs are working effectively and efficiently, and that they are good stewards of the public funds that are provided to them to do this partnership. I will tell you that I feel very fortunate to be a part of that process in our county. We have great partners throughout the county who we entrust every day to help provide good services to our young people, whether it's school-based services, legal aid services. We have programs that are focused on after-school programs. We have great partnerships with the Y. We have great partnerships with the Boys and Girls Clubs, for examples, where they provide a wide range of opportunities for young people. The diversion program that you guys have in your city and the department, one of the key benefits of it is the idea that you have partnerships that help to address the mental health needs of the young people and their families. These are all very critical parts of this very holistic approach to provide services to young people. It certainly cannot just be simply done by a governmental entity. It has to be done through this really closely knit public-private partnership to provide opportunities for people that we think can have long-lasting effects.
This has been a rough few weeks. Rougher all the time, it seems, every day. But I want to speak to the fact that being the oldest African-American church in San Mateo gives St. James AME Zion Church a rich and long history in social justice and in political activism in both of those arenas. St. James was one of the churches that was a diverse church when diversity was not popular, way back in the 40s and the 50s. And as such, the church has always had a relationship with the San Mateo Police Department, sometimes smoother than others. There was a long period of time before community policing was begun, when the community that I serve, North Central, was a real hot spot for gang activity and for a lot of problems with the police department. And so I think really that personal relationship is the key. When people in the community begin to know their law enforcement officials as good people and as allies, then a camaraderie builds. And that camaraderie is priceless. I worked at Sequoia High School for 25 years, and we had SROs, and the children got to know those police officers, and they trusted them, and the relationship that was built was very powerful for both the officers and for the students. And I think just like that can happen in a school, it can happen in a community. The challenge is that just like African Americans are negatively portrayed in the media far too often, more often than not, the police force is also portrayed negatively in times like these. What happened in Minnesota cast a shadow on every single law enforcement officer, which doesn't feel fair, and it's not fair. By the same token, when people of color are cast with the same and painted with the same brush, regardless of knowing anything else about them, that doesn't feel fair either. And so I think the way to combat this and to really infuse some hope into this situation is for police officers to get to know the families they serve. You know, walk the blocks, ask kids their names.
The San Mateo Police Department is doing something now that a lot of police departments do not do. One of the things that I was very impressed about when Chief Barberini assumed his position is one of the first things he did was he reached out, he came to our meeting, he reached out to me, wanted to get to know me and the branch and our leadership. From what I learned from talking to members is that the history going way back pretty much was the same as it was probably with any other community and its police departments. There was fear, there was mistrust, there was avoidance. What I learned is that things changed dramatically when Chief Susan Mannheim arrived around 2000, and she made a point of reaching out to the community, to North Central Neighborhood Association, to the churches, and the NAACP. There were ride-along programs, PAL activities at the MLK Center that was sponsored by the San Mateo Police Department. One of the things that was noted that started about the time that Chief Mannheimer took over was the promotion of diversity and the striving to make the department more diverse. I can say that in my time with the branch that the San Mateo Police Department has been very, very supportive and very, very willing to work with us. And I value that, and I think that that is a part of the reason that we have probably not as much, or we have activism, but it is positive and it's not, you know, negative from the standpoint of let's kill the police, but let's engage in positive change. There are changes that still need to be made, and there are things that all of us can do. And when you ask the question, what can the San Mateo Police Department do? Well, there were about 5 things that I came up with that I think that you're doing and continue to do that will help us, particularly in this time of national pain and unrest. And the first was acknowledging the community pain, and Chief Barberini did that at the top of this town hall. People are scared. People of color are scared. I can say that not only as a president of an NAACP branch, as a pastor or assistant pastor of a church, but as a mother, I'm scared. I'm scared every time my boys leave out of the house. I'm scared that they are going to encounter a situation in a place where they may run into that 1 or 2 or 3 bad cops, where they will end up in a situation where at best they may be racially profiled, and at worst they could end up dead. So for the police department to acknowledge there's fear out there, there's real fear out there, and to understand that what has been built up by the San Mateo Police Department in this community, a lot of that was torn down by what we saw on last Monday, and there needs to be a healing, and it needs to be time for that to return. Another thing that I want to say is that we need to continue with the accountability, and that's important. I think that that was an important statement by the San Mateo Police Department to not justify what happened in Minneapolis, that was wrong. Continue the community outreach, what you're doing with us, what you're doing with other community organizations. Continue to be there to meet with us, talk to us. Continue to work on the training. You talked a lot about training, and that's extremely important that in your press release, the continued training is not a one and done. talking about things like unconscious bias. We all have that, not just white or black, but we all have that. And to continue to stress that, because that is what informs how that officer reacts in that momentary life and death situation where that decision has to be made. And when that officer sees that person as a person and not just a black thug or a Hispanic thug or whatever, then we have a situation where the right decision can be made. By the same token, we as a community have to see our officers, and I have relatives who are law enforcement, as human beings, and they are making decisions and don't provoke and don't do things that are going to escalate the problem. And another part of the training is de-escalation. $20 counterfeit bill does not warrant what we saw. We have to look at ways of de-escalating, and the police department needs to continue to train officers on how to de-escalate situations that are not life-threatening. And then continue your practices with hiring, vetting people. I truly, this is me speaking, I believe that police work is not just a profession, it's a calling. It is something that not everybody is equipped to do. So vet out those people that are not equipped to do that and truly are called to do that, and also to continue to look for ways to bring more people of color onto the force. And I think if you continue to do that, and all of these things that I just mentioned, you have started, that we will make progress. And it's going to be slow and it's going to be tedious, but we'll make progress in healing the perception and the relationship between the community.
We have an English-speaking congregation and a Spanish-speaking congregation, and I will tell you that the experiences of those two congregations are very different when it comes to the perception of the police, how they feel about the police, the trust of the police. One congregation feeling that they're made safer by police presence, and another not so much. And so I think, I'll really lean heavily on what my colleague and dear friend, Pastor Bussey, said about getting to know people in the communities, and also just having that presence in a way that builds relationship. I think particularly in San Mateo, in the immigrant community, so much has gone on with ICE and the deportations, that the level of fear is palpable. And so that's a big hurdle. And I think also with diverse communities, and I really want to echo what Reverend Lori said as well. My daughter's Black, and I've had the talk, Mayor, and even in San Mateo, she just wrote an essay saying that she doesn't feel safe, and it may not be anything particular that the San Mateo police have done, but she's noticed from a really early age that when people get pulled over, they more often look like her than they look like me. And so, it's a hurdle. It's a big one. But I think that relationship building, that block by block, community by community, and knowing where, Chief, to put the right officers in the right communities, I think that will go a long way.
I want to thank all of the attendees. This was, it's easy to conduct, public outreach and do the community policing thing and do all those buzzwords when times are good. It's not so easy when times are bad. However, when times are bad or times are tough is when we need it the most. So that was the decision and the rationale behind getting out and doing this in a timely manner. We hope it was worthwhile. Familiarity breeds relationships. Relationships breed trust. The nice thing about this panel tonight is I didn't have to call anybody for the first time and introduce myself. We had all met, we had all connected, and I can't tell you how valuable that is. And if we can just expound on that and use that model as a community to develop those relationships that hopefully will evolve into that sense of trust on a larger scale, maybe we can start to move in the right direction. I also want to help people understand that we know, and I know that there's really no finish line to this. I know that long after I'm gone, we're still going to be trying to move in the right direction, nudge the ball, moving forward. And small steps may need to be taken in the beginning so we can take larger steps down the road. I think we'll always have room to improve. And I think that once we become satisfied with where we're at is when we get into a perilous point, and we can never become apathetic or passive about or comfortable with where we are. We always need to look to improve. The title of our little brief discussion today is community policing, and that is interpreted in many different ways by many different people. When community policing had its start, when it became the flavor of the day, police departments actually established community policing units and identified specific officers as community policing officers. Well, we've come to realize, and accurately so, that wasn't the most effective way or the effective manner to implement the principles of community policing. The reality is that every police officer must be a community policing officer, and that is something that we've embedded here at San Mateo PD, and I know that it's true of the police departments in our region. It's a philosophy that we have to adopt on a daily basis, and it shouldn't be some special project. On our website that I think that people will find very informative, and I encourage folks to check that out. It's got a great deal of information about who we are here at San Mateo PD, what we do, and how we do things. And we'll continue to develop that page and make it better as we go along. But I think it's a great start, and I think there's some valuable information and resources there. So please, if you have time, I encourage folks to take a look at the accountability page within our website. One of the first things I did when I stepped through the door here was that I reviewed the policy and procedure manual for the department. And it's a very lengthy and dense manual that requires a great deal of work and continual evaluation. You'll notice if you go to the manual, which is available on our webpage, I believe on the accountability page itself, that my name is not yet on those policy and procedures. There's a reason for that. That's intentional. When I got here, I established a committee to go through that manual front to back, every page, to reevaluate where we were as an organization, whether our policies were current, relevant, and best practices. I'd like to compliment the committee who did a lot of the heavy lifting. That I've recently received the fruits of their labor, and am reviewing that and giving my feedback so we can work to a place where we arrive at a policy manual that I'm comfortable putting my name on. Specifically today, I'm going to talk about use of force and our use of force policy and the 8 can't wait principles that are popular and have been well circulated. And I'm going to go through those and tell you where we're strong, and I'm going to tell you areas where we have some challenges and we need to work through. There are some areas where I'm confident that our policy does a good job of addressing the areas and we're compliant with the principles contained within 8 can't wait. And I'll go through those one by one. The first is a duty to intervene, meaning that officers who observe another officer violating a use of force policy, or any policy for that matter, have a duty to intervene. And I believe that's clearly stated within our use of force policy. Comprehensive reporting is something that I think that we've done a pretty good job in. I think it's there. I think that we can work on it and make it better, and I'm looking forward to our updated version, along with requiring de-escalation and use of force continuum. I think those things are embedded in our policy manual. However, I've seen a draft of our new manual, and I've actually given some pretty in-depth feedback, and I think those will be more clearly articulated in the updated version of the manual. What's come to be known as chokeholds or strangleholds, which we identify as carotid holds, are not authorized by policy. So I think we're very clear there and in compliance with the 8 can't wait principles. There's a couple areas that we have some challenges, and I'd like to walk through those in an effort to be completely open and forthcoming about where we're at. One is requiring a warning before firing your duty weapon or before shooting. Our policy does say that when it's feasible, officers should do that. Here's the problem, and it's going to be a consistent theme through a couple of the other principles within the 8 can't wait, is sometimes real life situations don't allow for adherence to policy. And there are circumstances that officers find themselves in the field that don't allow for this type of compliance in a safe manner. For example, if an officer is ambushed or encounters somebody shooting at someone else, for that officer to be required to identify themselves as a police officer and issue a warning before using that force, it may cost valuable seconds, valuable time that could have devastating results. So that's an area that we need to work through and take a look at and manage. Similarly, there are two other principles with the eight can't wait that we face the same challenges. One is to exhaust all other means before firing your firearm, and that's kind of an interpretation question. And again, we don't want to create a standard that officers simply can't adhere to in a safe manner. For example, if an officer is facing a threat that could cause them or somebody else in the public great bodily injury or even death, to require an officer to use force that would be inconsistent in protecting either someone else or themselves could be challenging. And again, it could have devastating results. So it's something that we have to work through, and we have to kind of have the discussions to identify what the eight can't wait principles really mean and how we can move towards adhering to those in a manner that's safe for everyone. And finally, the ban on shooting on moving vehicles is consistent with what I've been talking about. We highly discourage shooting at vehicles. We know that it's not safe, and it's something that we do everything we possibly can not to do. In fact, it's a drastic measure, and we recognize that. However, the problem is an absolute ban on that limits the ability of an officer, again, to protect the public and themselves. We've seen in other parts of the country and other parts of the world where vehicles are used as weapons, whether it's in some type of terrorist attack driving into a crowd or driving at one individual person. And the challenge we have, the problem we have in dealing with that is having officers stand by and allowing that to happen without taking any type of action. How do we work through that? So that's where we are with the eight can't wait from a policy perspective. Again, our policy, our use of force policy, our updated use of force policy that will have my name on it, is very, very close to being completed. And I think you'll see some language in there that makes these principles much more clear, or our adherence to these principles much more clear. However, we're still going to have a little bit of a challenge with a few of them as we move forward, just from a safety perspective, and making sure that we're establishing a standard that officers can safely adhere to. It's the absolute nature of some of these that make it difficult, and remove some of the decision-making efforts that officers are required to make in the field that can be difficult. So that's where we are with the eight can't wait. I hope that kind of clears. I know that we posted that on our accountability page, and what I've explained is in written form and an easy to read chart on our accountability page. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And I understand that there may be there may be questions of what I just described, and there may be a counter argument and all that type of stuff. And I don't really see it as taking a position from an argument standpoint. I really look at it as something, hey, how can we implement the safest policy possible, and allowing officers to protect those that we're tasked with protecting, as well as themselves, while doing that in a safe and responsible manner. So that's an overview of our use of force policy as it applies to the eight can't wait. I hope that clears things up. And moving forward, I don't want to take up too much of the session. I just want to address a couple things that have also come our way. And again, I want to take these on head on in an open fashion. One is the response to the protest that we experienced in San Mateo a couple weeks ago. I'd first like to say that I'm grateful and proud to both those who participated in the event and the officers who were assigned to the event. As there were no injuries, no property damage, no arrest, and no enforcement action. And for a demonstration of that size, and given the subject matter, that's quite an accomplishment if we look at what's been happening around the Bay Area, the state, and the country. From a law enforcement perspective, especially within this county, but also across the Bay Area and the state. We've also learned that, we can't manage incidents of this size on our own, that we have to do this in a collaborative manner with other law enforcement agencies. We regularly send San Mateo police officers to assist other jurisdictions with these types of events, and we in this one particular demonstration was no exception. Our objectives were clear for that day. We wanted to provide for the safety and security of those participating in the protests, to provide them a safe forum to be heard and to exercise their rights. 2, we wanted to provide for the safety and security of the surrounding community and the city as a whole. And 3, to prevent any physical harm to anyone, and to prevent any type of property damage. And finally, we wanted to accomplish these goals with a minimum amount of enforcement effort as possible. We did not want to be part of the story. We wanted everybody to be able to say what they wanted to say and get out there and participate in this important event and do it peacefully. And while the vast majority of those who participated in the protest were there to exercise their rights in a peaceful manner, there were also groups who intended to prevent the accomplishment of the goals I just mentioned. And when we recognized this, we took the necessary steps to prevent any harm or destruction of property. I'm extremely pleased that we were able to take these steps and achieve these goals without any need for force or enforcement or arrest. And while necessary, I also recognize and acknowledge that the steps taken in the presence of law enforcement had an impact on many of those that were in attendance, especially those who had no intention of causing any harm or damage. I do recognize that and acknowledge that. I was pleased with the way we quickly and publicly provided an overview of the event and our response. I thought it was clear and accurate. However, I realized that the message did not include a recognition or acknowledgement of its impact on those in attendance, and it should have. And as we always do, we'll learn from this and work to be more aware and conscientious with our messaging as we move forward. Finally, there's been we had a budget item on our city council meeting Monday night, and there's been a lot of conversation about funding of police departments, defunding of police departments, and there's a lot of misinterpretation, or not misinterpretation, but different interpretation of what that actually means. When folks talk about defunding police departments, sometimes they're meaning many different things. And we know that, we have a budget, and within that budget, we're tasked with providing necessary services to the community. And we want to do that in the most effective and efficient way possible. As I mentioned when I started, transparency and communication are crucial to any community policing model. And I'm sharing the information today in an effort to be consistent with that model and to promote that level of engagement. The relationship between this police department, the San Mateo Police Department, and the residents of our city has always been a special one, and we're committed to this relationship. The COVID-19 virus and the issues we're currently facing with policing have obviously provided significant challenges. And though through all of this, there are some encouraging signs for me. I've seen police officers who remain committed to serving the community. I'm continually heartened by the level of commitment, not only in their day-to-day jobs, but I know we have a member of the POA board here. The POA board independently stood up and said, hey, Easter is going to be kind of rough for the young people in our community. How can we make it better? And they came up with their own program and partnered with PAL to reach out to those kids who maybe don't have the resources that others do to enjoy Easter, and get them Easter baskets so that they didn't miss out on a holiday due to this type of virus, along with what they're doing every week in serving families, pantry boxes that get a family through the next 2, 3, 4 days, just from basic needs. When I see officers involved in that and motivated, it encourages me, and it makes me think that there's an avenue for us to move forward. More than anything, though, I'm encouraged by the support we receive from our residents on a daily basis. I can't tell you how much we appreciate the kind phone calls and emails and letters that we get. The support means the world to us, and we appreciate that.
So as Chief Barberini alluded to, or stated, I should say, when he touched on the subject just a few minutes ago, defunding means a variety of things to a variety of people. From the standpoint of defunding police departments, some people mean to completely disband. Other people mean to take some of the monies and move them around. I can say that I personally do not feel that it is appropriate nor in the best interest of any community to disband a police department unless that police department is so beyond repair. And it looks like that was the feeling in Minneapolis. I'm personally not commenting on that, but apparently they felt that way. So unless that police department is so corrupt and so beyond repair that it does not work to try to fix it, then I think that that would be appropriate. Beyond that, I don't believe that disbanding, taking all the money away from a police department, if that is the definition some people are interpreting, is appropriate, nor would it be safe for a community. I think the whole concept of just unilaterally taking money away from the police budget to do something else with, again, has to be looked at, because one of the things I advocate for is for more and better training, more outreach for reaching other populations of color in the community to recruit them. And so if you're cutting the police budget to the degree that they're not able to do that, then it would be counterproductive to some of the things that a lot of us are talking about in those areas. So it's a catchy phrase right now, and a lot of people are angry, and a lot of people are feeling this is the solution. And it's really kind of a one-dimensional, in my opinion, one-dimensional approach to a very complex problem. There could be situations where some money should be reallocated, but I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all for every single police department across the country.
To speak to Reverend Owen's point about our recruitment, I couldn't be more pleased by the representation that we have in this department right now. I just checked, and I believe we have 12 officers, maybe 13 officers that are on duty right now. I believe 9 or 10 of them are minorities right now working. In the locker room, the female locker room, we have a very diverse locker room. We have Polynesian officers, we have Hispanic officers, we have Asian officers, we have Hispanic officers, we have African-American officers. This department is well over a third minority department. And I know when we go to recruitment events, we all come together. It's not just one group that's coming out there and representing the department. We are one together, but we are an extremely diverse group, and I'm proud of it. As far as being an African-American officer and any challenges that present, realistically, there is a historical chasm between the African-American community and law enforcement. It must be acknowledged. It's there. However, because of my training, my experience in education, I've never been torn about my ability to be an African-American woman being a law enforcement officer.
One thing I think that's going to come out of these conversations is just what the standards are in San Mateo, what the standards are in California, and how they're vastly different across the country, how standards, on this part of the country are not exactly the same standards, the hiring standards, the training standards, how many hours our officers have to work and sit through training and the annual training that they have to work through. In some of the recent conversations about defunding the police, people out there have mentioned we need to send social workers out to handle mental health calls instead of police officers if there's no crime. What would that look like? For example, today we had a call for service where a man was threatening suicide with a knife to his neck. Realistically, if the police don't respond to those calls, what does that look like?
Well, I wouldn't, put that, immediately back onto the community. Again, I think what we need to do is examine, what's been done and, what works, and look at examples from other, cities and counties here in the Bay Area. More outreach, workers, whether they be clinicians or peers, or individuals that just have a background in recovery, that they be involved in a preventative measure model where they are, called out. One of the things that we provide in NAMI is, a warm line, and we receive calls, and then we get a support team or a fast team involved. And then if it's elevated to another level, we get the PERT team involved, or we contact, programs like Life Moves to get involved. Then there are calls where the outreach team or the team gets involved, but they do their research and assessment, and they determine, do I need to have a civil standby, where they are still the leads in the call, and then they have the officers there for a potential 5150. And then you elevate it from the 5150, you go to someone that is struggling with suicidal or homicidal ideations and has a plan that could put others in danger, community, themselves, and the worker. So you would need to have law enforcement there for safety purposes and securing the situation.
Conflict resolution is something, and community law enforcement relations is something that is very specific that we've been working on really truly in the early 2000s, even before then. And back actually early in the mid 90s, we were doing street mediation with members who identified as gang affiliates, and really looking at the model actually that made national headlines at one point. That was an interrupters model that was based out of Chicago. We brought it here and was doing it, and we're doing it very innovatively with the city of San Mateo. Soon thereafter, in the early 2000s, there was some conflict that erupted in the Pacific Islander community that was between San Mateo and San Bruno communities, and we were able to step in again and be innovative and create some cohesion and community relations, support the community relations between the Pacific Islander population and law enforcement. And then in early 2000s, we were called again to participate with the city on addressing high crime and conflict that was happening within the north central part of San Mateo, north central San Mateo, but specifically in the 700 block of North Amplet. And we created together, collaboratively created a project that was called the Strengthening Neighborhoods Project. It really looked at calls for service and building the community, really working with the community to build community leadership and take from the community themselves as leaders, not having to rely only on city resources. We also helped to create opportunities for dialogue and deliberation between community and law enforcement, so there could be an increase of trust and relationship building. And we really found that by providing opportunities for listening sessions and dialogue and deliberation and training on cultural humility and implicit bias, on communication and conflict resolution, since that is our forte, and really acting as a cultural broker, that we were really able to address in all those examples that I gave you, an increase in how community talked about law enforcement, how they felt about law enforcement. And that was not only our elders in our community, but our young people. And, from that, we were able to work in the Real Court of San Mateo and North Central San Mateo around the King Center for a number of years, continued to do that, and really have appreciated our partnership with law enforcement.
One of the thoughts that came to mind in hearing the Reverend and Ms. Velches is, even looking at a civilian academy, where the law enforcement and the community get together and really dissect and study, what law enforcement goes through, from academy to the street, and then, to a call. And so I think it's really important, for all of us, to educate ourselves so that we can make, a very sound, and profound recommendations moving forward.
On behalf of the POA, I just want to emphasize how committed we are, not only to our calling in public service, but we're committed to continuing to have an open and respectful dialogue with the citizens of San Mateo. It is of the utmost importance that we keep this relationship, everything positive about it, continues to remain positive. We want it to grow. We want it to get better. We want it to heal. We want it to continue to be respectful.
One thing that was brought to my attention recently is, we need to reach the people that don't agree with us, because we need to have those conversations. We need people that don't understand why we do what we do to come to the Citizens Academy, to come do ride-alongs, to come meet with us, so that we can have that conversation and break down those barriers.
My name is Drew Corbett, and I am San Mateo City Manager. As City Manager, I'm responsible for overseeing the city's operations. So from public works to parks and recreation to community development, city administration, the police department. I'm responsible for ensuring that we're providing services that impact the community positively. I'm responsible for ensuring that we're accountable to the public. Under most circumstances, I have a good feel for how we're doing, where we're doing well, and where we could use some improvement. With that said, these are not normal circumstances. With a global pandemic that's led to an economic recession, all of our lives have been turned upside down over the past several months. In addition, several recent national tragedies involving the police that have resulted in the deaths of people of color have amplified the continuing racial disparities and inequities in our country and in policing that we have to contend with. As San Mateo City Manager, I'm confident in our city employees. I'm confident in our police department. I know how much city employees, police officers love this community, love this city.
Officer Lupe Mejia, and I've been with San Mateo for about 15 years. During my time here, I've been blessed to work numerous assignments and receive training, which have allowed me to work in the community in many different ways. So currently I'm here as a line level officer. And even though I come here with different skill sets and experiences, I'm more than aware that there's always room for improvement. And so tonight I want to hear from you all, and I want to hear your thoughts and take back some of your thoughts and concerns for my growth and that of my peers.
I think that if you have a mental health call, for example, I've heard on the news many times that we should be sending mental health professionals to people in crisis. And I think that's an excellent idea, but I don't think they're the first responders. And I don't think we should get to a point where they become the first responders for purely a safety standpoint, from purely a safety standpoint. I believe that by the time a person who is in crisis generates a police call, it's usually a highly charged incident in which someone may be dangerous. And you need someone who can protect the public from that person, protect that person from hurting themselves. And the idea of eliminating police response to such incidents is shocking to me.
Chief Barberini, I think you should be smiling. I think your group does a great job. You should be proud of it. And a big smile is, I think, what you should have. I'd like to see in downtown San Mateo, and I have seen it on occasion, but not regularly, the idea of the old beat cop, just a policeman that may walk down the street and back, not continually, but to make contact with the community people so people know who's serving them.
First, I'm ex-military and I'm a data-driven person, so I look for evidence and things like that. And I'd encourage everyone here to look at a site called policescorecard.org that uses public data submitted by the city, county, state of every state in the country. And it does things like analyze police violence and policy compared to other major departments in the United States. And I think everyone on this call might find that highly informative. San Mateo is doing okay. San Mateo has a B- score, definitely room for improvement. In fact, I heard Officer Maya mention that earlier in the call. I think other departments in the local area fare much worse. But take a look at that because it brings some real evidence to the discussion. Secondly, I think there's an important issue around demilitarization of the police that I'd like to highlight as a priority. San Mateo has taken some equipment from the federal government that seems reasonable, but other cities have taken things like mine-resistant vehicles, apparently to protect against the heavily mined El Camino Real route. These are $750,000 tanks that are used by our departments in Millbrae and Redwood City, etc. And I just want to voice that that kind of equipment is not appropriate for a civilian police agency.
I was reflecting on how many moving parts there are to manage a police department and a community. And I think that we have to avoid painting our community with the same brush of stuff that's going on, even in cities around us. I have 3 examples to commend the well-coordinated relationships of San Mateo Police Department, the social services groups in the area, and the community. It's apparent that these 3 groups combine their effort to focus on problem solving and community well-being. The first one is several years ago, we participated at San Mateo High School with their Teen Drink and Drive. This is a community-focused program working with resources, and of course, teenagers don't want to listen to anything, but it was a very effective drink and drive program. The second thing is we recently engaged with San Mateo Police Department with a homeless man and a pit bull. When they responded, it was obvious that the man was unafraid, engaged with them willingly, and they were able to locate a housing situation that would accept the dog. The officer was friendly and clearly focused on problem solving. The homeless man greeted him easily. In the callback, and the policeman called back, he commented on what an excellent homeless outreach program, and the incident reflects the calm community social interchange that we have in the community. The third incident was the San Mateo Police Department participation in the Black Lives Matter March. They are trained to notice and proactively protect, and they observe people picking up stones, some, and recognize some violent outsiders from other communities.
I also happen to be an African-American man. First of all, I do want to commend the San Mateo Police Department. I really think they're a fair group. I feel safe. I want to commend the San Mateo community since I've been here. I think the police department is a reflection of the community and the community's values. So getting that out of the way, I just want to give a little bit of background and say, obviously this is a very diverse country. Since I've been here in the Bay, I have not experienced many of the things I've experienced other places. I grew up in Indiana, and I lived a large part of my life in Portland. I, like most people, am surrounded by peers who are similar to me, pretty well-educated, professional Black men. And when I talk to these group of men, we all say, we've lived in nice neighborhoods, et cetera, but we cannot count how many times we've been stopped and frisked, asked questions, basically have to prove our innocence when we haven't done anything. Now, like I said, thank God these things don't happen in San Mateo, and I commend the San Mateo Police Department. I just want to say this, good police officers, it's a tough job, and they are, in my mind, heroes. Bad police officers can do such tremendous damage that they can do more damage than criminals. And I'm surrounded by African-American men, my brothers, professionals. We don't have criminal backgrounds. We didn't grow up in bad neighborhoods. And yet we've had so many encounters that put us in added danger. So keep doing what you're doing in San Mateo. You're doing a great job. I support you. And my only concern is I would just like to learn more about qualified immunity, because I do want to know that if there is a bad police officer, that as a citizen,
20 seconds.
That we'll be able to go through the proper steps to have that case reviewed and have that person held accountable.
I think we've been asking police to do too much, including addressing many things that policing was never meant to solve. You know, for example, police shouldn't have to manage the homelessness in our community that's the result of our collective failure to provide more homes for people. I think it makes sense for the city to create alternatives to policing. For many of the roles currently played by police, there are tons of exciting examples already in place around the country or being formed now. Mobile crisis intervention teams like Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon, and Mental Health First in Sacramento. Violence interrupters like Cure Violence in Chicago and elsewhere, and Gideon's Army in Nashville. Albuquerque is forming a new Albuquerque Community Safety Department to respond to calls of inebriation and homelessness and addiction and mental health issues. And I imagine many folks have read that Berkeley is discussing turning over traffic enforcement to a new non-police agency. And part of the reason I think these alternatives are a good idea is that I am concerned about the racial disparities in policing in San Mateo County.
I personally have always had a tremendously positive experience interacting with the police department and our officers and leaders in that department. But I'm white. I'm a community leader. I'm well known. I have heard from others that they have not had those positive experiences, and that gives me tremendous concern. So it's something I would encourage the PCRC and department to think about is whether there are forums that could be properly managed that provide for anonymous participation. Because I know people are worried about things like retaliation when they speak up and express their concerns about the police department. And I really want to hear what people have to say, and I really want our city leaders to hear that too, so that they can understand and make really good and informed decisions, because it's the stuff I've heard on the QT that has really made me concerned about what's happening. Early in my residence in my current neighborhood, which is very diverse, one of my neighbors called the police on an African-American man who was sitting in his vehicle on the phone. That's actually a pretty common thing, especially right now, because people are taking business calls and trying to get a quiet place away from their children on the phone. But the police came and interrupted that gentleman's phone call. And he was just trying not to disturb the people he was staying with to make a personal phone call early in the morning. So that struck me as wrong in two ways. One of my neighbors was calling the police because there was someone sitting quietly on the telephone. And the second was that the police responded. And just because someone who was Black was sitting in a car and someone called. As we move forward as a community, how are the police going to handle these kinds of things? And that's something I think we need to really think hard about as a community. It is not wrong to be Black and be in San Mateo. It is right.
So I'd just like to thank all of our officers for what they're doing right now, and I can only imagine how difficult it must be being an officer during these times. And I'd just like to thank them because an officer, if you ask them a question, they could just dismiss it. But I've noticed officers in San Mateo, if you have a question, they really take time out of their day to answer your question and really talk to you. And I find that extremely nice, and I'd just like to thank them. I've lived in San Mateo for all 13 years I've been alive, and I'd just like to say thank you to our officers for taking time to acknowledge us.
I'd like to share a brief story of the Black Lives Matter march that I went to, the original one, which I also went to the Families March, which was a peaceful march that I brought my 7-year-old and 3-year-old child to. It was peaceful, and other callers have mentioned that it was nonviolent. And I would say that it was nonviolent until we got to the police station, at which point violence was actually incited by the San Mateo Police Department. There was a huge number of officers that approached a group that was kneeling in solidarity with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the other Black lives that have been murdered by police. And they got out from a car in riot gear. They had a helicopter circling the area at relatively low altitude, and the environment changed immediately to one of violence and hostility due to the actions specifically of San Mateo Police Department. I say this as a white San Matean who felt relatively safe in that environment because I don't personally feel threatened by the actions of the police, because I know that I'm not disproportionately targeted. But I know other minoritized San Mateans, including Black San Mateans, Latino San Mateans, who felt directly threatened by the actions of the San Mateo Police Department at a protest in solidarity with Black lives. And I think that we can move forward by finding ways to approach finding community that don't involve approaching a protest of hundreds of kneeling protesters celebrating Black life in riot gear. So, if we find ways of policing our community in solidarity, policing our community through social support, helping the homeless off of our streets by, without having to show up with arms, without having to show up with dozens of officers to the Families Black Lives Matter March, this sends a message that the expectation at these events is one of hostility. And I think if we believe that the city of San Mateo is a place where all lives are truly welcome and celebrated, that we don't need to approach nonviolent marches with hostility.
It should be mandatory, though, that anybody who provides phone camera footage involving the police, that there should be a statement of what was occurring directly before that footage, since there's an incomplete picture, that's normally provided. I think we also need to stop relying on statements that allege racial disparity without sharing the statistics of the makeup of who's committing the crimes. And no one would say that each traffic stop may have small deviations, only that complying with directions of an officer when most officers know that there's a high statistic, maybe the highest statistic, that that's where cops get killed is during traffic stops. And I don't know who put into law that people should have tinted windows, because who would knows in a car? Who knows what's going on in a car? And so that's very dangerous. So yes, people should just, comply.
Thank you everyone for attending. So grateful that you gave up your time with us this evening to provide this diverse and valuable feedback. Just a couple of thoughts I had as listening to the feedback. The very first comment of the night about this being a larger problem than just the PD. Absolutely, we recognize that as a city. We have recently formed an internal diversity, equity, and inclusivity committee that's going to be headed up by a couple of subject matter experts that we are fortunate enough to have on staff to learn about how we can promote and encourage being more equitable, being more inclusive as a city organization, and in terms of our services that we provide to the community.
Our meeting objectives, Michael talked a little bit about it, is for youth and law enforcement, as well as our other leaders, to be able to engage in a conversation about policing. And we have asked our distinguished guests here tonight to explore this topic with us.
Yeah, so when I think about this, the first word I think of is met with caution, because I think that...
Sorry, Julia, could you just speak a little bit louder?
Sorry, met with caution, because when you're dealing with police and youth, I think it's really important so that students and children grow up understanding that the police are supposed to be there to protect you. And with that idea, I think it's just something good to have to feel safe. When I was younger, the first experience I've had with a police officer was when I accidentally called 911 on the phone when I was very younger. I didn't understand the meaning. So he came to the door and I opened it and I was like, whoa, who's this? And then after that, he took the time to explain what 911 meant. And that experience made it more positive for me. I have a more positive experience with the police than other people, I believe. So officers taking the time to do that, it's just it's awesome. So
yeah.
Growing up, definitely before I became a police explorer, I was kind of in the whole stereotype that the police were kind of bad. And I kind of grew up skating around with a group of kids, and we'd skateboard, and it was always kind of the rhetoric. The police are, bad, they're bad, blah, blah. And I kind of believed it for a good portion. I was always bummed whenever I had encounters with the cops. And over time, I kind of came to an understanding that they really weren't that bad. And I really started to have an interest in law enforcement and became a police explorer. And I really realized that, especially San Mateo PD, when I was an explorer, they did a pretty good job building a connection with not only the community, but the youth. There's a ton of details I got to do as an explorer where we would, post up at a table and take kids' fingerprints and stuff and, hand out stuff. And even on ride-alongs, a lot of officers trying anything they could do to, connect with the youth. So I definitely say before I became a police explorer, I didn't really see it. And I really just think it's on how people almost educate themselves in a way.
Mm.
Well, I appreciate all of the youth that are on sharing a little bit about their experiences and the experiences that they've seen. And, for me, when I think about this topic, I think about how important that is, how important to support the voices of our youth in really driving the conversation around youth and policing. When we think about impacts and experience and perspective, right, that's all shaped from very, very young ages with our kiddos, and from the time that they're my daughter's age, who's 2, right, all the way until the ages of the panelists here, right, where they're in their teens, and having those experiences. And I think, as an educator, as being on the board, we think of youth don't always have that opportunity, right? They don't always have the space and the time, and they're not always being asked to share their experience and perspective. And so when we engage in these conversations around youth and policing, for me, what's the most important is to really hear those experiences and perspectives. And particularly when we think about the history of our country, the history of our systems, I think there has to be an acknowledgement that, I talk a lot about our educational system and how you know, it was rooted and created on racist ideology, right? And we think about how that was established really across the board in terms of all of our systems. And so I think entering the conversation with that acknowledgement, and so then how do we really work to engage voices, to hear experience and perspective, and to continue to challenge our systems and to push them to become better. And part of that is leveraging the voices of communities and of our youth of color. And so I think what's wonderful about the youth that we have here today is that we really are hearing those experiences and perspectives of groups of individuals who aren't always, who the system isn't necessarily always designed to serve in the best way. And that's not just the police system, but that's all of our systems.
And when I think about that topic, I think a lot about community policing. I know the youth, especially here in San Mateo, are our future, who are going to probably be the leaders in our community. So a lot of it is, I think, building that positive relationship early is very important. I know growing up in Oakland, a lot of the context that I had about police early on was fairly negative. Just knowing family or friends who have been arrested before, I kind of painted a negative picture, at least for me when I was young. I wasn't ever really disrespectful towards police, but it was something where if I saw police, I probably would avoid them. It wasn't until probably getting introductions in school where I had a DARE police officer, later on in high school where police running specific clubs in high school actually kind of introduced themselves, that I actually spent time in talking with an officer and actually getting to know them a little bit better. So yeah, I had a similar experience to Leiden and Ryan where it ended up where I actually had to become a cadet. And I actually took it because I needed a summer job. But going into it, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Kind of looking at the different things, meeting officers, talking to them, and seeing that they did more than just arrest people, and that they did community-based outreach with the PAL program or Police Activities League, things like that. Kind of prompted me to have a better view of them, and ultimately is what got me into police work. So I think it's very important to kind of build that bond early, give people opportunity to get to know officers and make judgments on a firsthand basis rather than just kind of hearing the negative connotation or kind of seeing it happen to someone else and making a judgment from there. So that firsthand experience of getting to talk to kids or being out there to help out kids, I think is an important contact in kind of developing that bridge and kind of getting to know what issues is important to them and how we can make that better.
So for me, I'm like Officer Wynn. So as a young child, I had a very horrific experience with a handful of officers, and it traumatized me. I mean, I was terrified of officers after that. I was terrified. So I remember I met some rookie cops who are now leaders in our community, and they were just wet behind the ears, young officers who would sit and talk with me and gave me a different perspective. It was more of a humanizing perspective of these officers, that just those 4 officers that I had this traumatic incident with as a very young child are not all officers. So when I hear it, it's almost the reason why I'm here. It is the reason why I'm here. So I think of like it should be the driving force for innovations within police departments. Youth and community and police have to be this kind of connectedness, and that each department needs a youth services unit, a unit where you have like our unit. We are a unit where we have the Police Activities League, so we engage youth and from young children all the way up to 18 with activities, kind of how to be a fun young kid again. And we also have officers engage with the youth in these fun activities, and they actually share their experiences, and there's this interconnectedness and this reciprocity of experiences that happens. We have like cadets in our Explorers program is under our unit. We also have diversion, which I'm in, which diversion is one of those things where it's like, hey, we got a little bit of trouble, but we want to keep you out the system. We do not want you to touch probation system, right? And so when I think of youth and policing, I have to put the word community in that. And I can't stress it enough as a unit, the work that we do. And it is not about so much, you think police, you think arrest. It's so much about building relationships. It's so much about working through trauma. It's so much about, hey, we're all part of this community, and what does that look like?
With some of the recent tensions of, I guess, the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's been actually kind of difficult for me to I've felt a little bit of fear actually when I've been around police, even though I've had that experience when I was younger. There's still been some negative ones in my life that's I guess it's just hard to ignore when it comes to those bad experiences. They kind of outweigh that one good childhood experience. And even though I know it shouldn't be like that, but it's still like that in the back of my mind. There's always something could happen. There's people on the other side of the country who's being hurt. So it's even though it may not be these officers, it kind of it still affects me, I guess, the stuff that's happening around the world. So
about last year, I think I was 17. I was with a group of friends. We were skating around. We were kind of snooping around, walking up this trail. We're skating at an abandoned Vista Point. We really weren't supposed to be there. Later we find out, the sheriff comes up, tells us to sit down on the curb. We're all my friends are freaking out. I'm sitting there knowing I've kind of had experience with law enforcement in the past. I kind of know how this is going to go. He asked for our IDs. We gave him our IDs. We explained him what we're doing up there. And he was really he kind of stood in our shoes. He scared us. He tried scaring us to really prove a point. We can't be up there, but he sat in his shoes and he goes, if I didn't have to enforce my job, I would do this as a teenager too. And he goes, this is arrestable. You guys could get fined or arrested right now. This is not this is pretty bad. You guys are trespassing basically. But he's like, look, what can we do right now to make this better where you don't have to get cited or don't have to get arrested and we can walk away with both, free. And so we basically came up with a compromise. There's a bunch of trash up at this abandoned Vista Point. And he said, let's grab that tarp, let's fill it up, and let's walk down the hill and dump the trash. And so all of us, even him, he was, Officer Supan or Sheriff Supan, he was walking over and he's picking trash up with us. And I'm talking to him and told him look, I'm sorry. And, I guess we realized we shouldn't be up here, but you did the right thing. I think you as a deputy did, I think, the best scenario, because he easily could have just written us up and it would have been it would have been such a bummer. So he really did the right job to really prove a point, but also he stepped in our shoes. And there's a lot of officers at San Mateo PD I've seen do the same exact thing.
Growing up, I had a very variety of experiences and interactions with cops, but I wouldn't say that most of them directed me towards a negative energy towards all police. I actually had some of my family members, relatives were cops for San Mateo. So I actually saw positions where I could possibly be, and Officer Unga and Keala, and they've all been positions that were very just not using their position for power or a form of I don't know how to explain that, but I'm trying to say that they came from a very respectful and kind manner, and just interacting with most officers, I never felt a threat. And I feel like there's different experiences due to certain profiling of cops towards other people, and just experiencing the idea of when I'm with myself, I could easily communicate and eloquently speak with a cop. But if I'm with my a group of my boy cousins or my brothers, then there seems to be a fear and a distance that we have to try to break through first. And I've had countless interactions where if I'm with a certain group of people, there would be a different almost crowd reading from officers, and I understand like watching their guard and everything that takes into being a cop and being an officer and being aware of your surroundings. But I would say that a lot of my experiences with police locally have been that of a place in respect and admiration. I believe, like, also to add on, sorry, I think personally, like, I don't look threatening enough to be like a cop's problem. And I think that really goes from person to person. Like, if you have like a certain, you know, demeanor or face, there will be a different type of, you know, front. And there's a different, you know, energy towards conversation, towards communication, body language, and all that stuff that I feel like are definitely other, you know, building blocks to how a situation will go.
I've been blessed in terms of being able to work at fantastic schools and working with people in the community where I've been able to talk to kids and kind of know their background more. So it doesn't always start off with trust to begin with, but like one student was asking me when I was teaching a great lesson is, you know, why should we consider a police officer a trusted adult? What makes them a trusted adult in the situation? And I said, it's based on your experience. So kind of, if you feel like after talking to me or meeting me and knowing what I do or what my intentions are, if you feel like you can trust me to talk to me about any situation that you're going through, then you can start considering me a trusted adult. But in order to have that conversation or have that feeling, you gotta have that outreach first, that little bridge and gap in being able to conversate and talk to each other. So it's very important, I think, to get out in the community as a police officer, especially in this time where there might be distress out there. You know, not giving up and still going out there and reaching out to youth is important.
And, you know, I think we've heard lots of different experiences that the youth have had. And really one of the things that I've learned a lot from this conversation, you know, or one of the things I guess that this illuminates for me is this idea that, you know, there are really these perspectives are being shaped by kind of individual experiences that folks are having, which is a really important aspect of how we engage in this work. The other piece that I think a lot about is this idea around how do we systematize that, right? Because when it becomes, if you have, you know, particular experience, then this is how your perspective is shaped, or, you know, this is how you experience law enforcement. And if you have another experience, you know, this is how that shapes your experience with law enforcement. And so how do we create more experiences, both to have youth share their experience, both to have interaction, engagement in a way that, you know, that feels right for individual communities? Because I think a big part of, you know, when you think about sitting in a system of power, any system of power, you know, we have one perception of how that interaction should go or how we should build community, right? And I think what's really important is to think about how individual communities, again, particularly communities that haven't been well supported by many of our systems and structures, what that means for them, and how building community and building those relationships, what that would look like for them.
So I work with youth who have not had the best experiences, you know. I mean, any experience where you are arrested, you know, and is not the best experience. But it's so beautiful to hear from the panelists, because I had this idea when in 2018, when we kind of revamped this program. And it was a lot around having officers work along with us, especially, like I said, like when we pulled in our school resource officers. The reason why we had them as part of our unit was because they had a great connection with like patrol officers, right? And so, we could get them on board to be able to do more interactions with the youth. And so hearing this, I was going back and forth because of COVID-19 around what will it look like once this is all up, once this is all done, and how will we do our program? And one component that stands out for us is the fact that Youth and their families were terrified pretty much to come inside the police department. They did not feel comfortable. There was a lot of trauma and like Ms. Watkins said, Watkinson said, a lot of hurt around their experiences, right? Some good and some not so good, but just the fact that their child had gotten into trouble just alone it was tough for families. So I had them come here and we did a lot of community-based things right here under this roof, under the police department's roof. And we had police officers come in and on Saturdays I like to dance. So we had officers in full uniform doing the Soul Train line with the kids. You're gonna dance just like the kids, right? So I think, and when we do cleanups, we as officers, we go right along with the kids. So I love that story, young Mr. Fuller, our electrician, about that sheriff doing that, because a lot of our officers kind of, why should we have to do this too? So now because of you, they will continue to help pick up garbage and do community service with the kids. I love it.
I'm curious from the youth, as we think about really engaging more youth voices and, when you think about what that would look like and how that could be most impactful and how, both from the police department and also, as we think about from the school angle, what do you guys see as the best ways to engage in those conversations to get the most voices, particularly from folks that might be hesitant to share their real experiences, because I think those perspectives are so important as we think about, how we move forward and again, how we continue to improve all of our systems. So I'd be interested to hear from you all what you have found to be the most impactful and effective ways to share that.
I think probably the most important thing is accessibility when giving options to communicate with police officers. So I don't know if you guys have maybe a suggestion box somewhere, or maybe even a suggestion box at school would be cool to have an option. Just to be able to share your experience, or maybe online to just, if you have an experience with the police, positive or negative, you can share it and read out and maybe learn from it.
It's forming that kind of relationship in a setting where it's not hostile, where it's not dangerous, where it's not to keep safety or enforce law. And I think that would definitely be a beneficial space for all people, all officers, to create relationships with the youth, and the youth that do have experiences with negative circumstances that they've experienced in the past that they would love to address a cop about.
A lot of what I felt helped me out and even gave me more of a skill set going forward was the interaction not only with kids, but also with their families, getting to know them, working with the youth services unit, diversion, PAL, and everything. It gave me an opportunity to kind of see things from a lot of different perspectives. So it kind of gave that kind of village is raising a child kind of feeling, like that old proverb says. And basically it got more hands into the pot and not people just working individually in terms of helping this child. It was like a team effort of everyone putting something in.
What I could walk away with is I really wish more people could be able to almost go on ride-alongs and really experience what it's like to be in the shoes of a cop. Because to be honest, their job's not easy. I thought it was not. I thought it was something completely different until I went on my first ride-along, and I saw so much my first night after being able to pass my ride-along test. I went from a petty theft call to a shooting. It was out of nowhere, and you really get a good wide open look at this is what this job is like. It's not all fun and games chasing bad guys, pulling people over. They deal with some really real stuff, and sometimes that could be very, at the end of the day, you almost don't want to deal with it. It's a really touchy subject sometimes, depending on what that call might be. They don't really know what sometimes they're even getting themselves into. Officer Trujillo probably was the #1 cop at San Mateo PD that I looked up to, because he went into his job every single day loving it. And every single person he dealt with on the streets, he treated them just like a normal human. And there's a ton more officers out there at San Mateo PD that do the same exact thing.
One thing I want to leave you guys with is to not be afraid to speak up, because there are officers like Miss Page and Mr. Nguyen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So you guys should be like, even if you had a bad experience like me with cops, that there are people who really want to look out for you, get to know you as a community, and you've heard their voices today. So I think it's really important that if you have had a bad experience, that you should speak up. So, because they want to make the police department better. They're here. They want to talk to the youth. So just get the courage to be able to like share experience and get to know them a little more.
It takes two to really understand everything that's going on with, you know, policing youth, and it really is like there's so many different doors and segues and directions that we could go to help just reevaluate everything that we as a community all together can really allow each other to live in unity and connection.
In terms of all these different programs, we should be partnering with our community in terms of mediation, in terms of counseling, in terms of mental health. We should be all as a team, all as a kind of like a unified system, like what Ryan said, as a community, kind of working together to make changes and do positive things. So a lot of that is going to take breaking down walls, but you know, never quit, never feel like you're not going to make a difference, and just go out there and try to make a change one day at a time for one person at a time. And I think overall it's going to lead to a good system.
This month, we are sitting down with senior citizens from our communities to learn more about how they view policing and to understand their feedback and how we can do better from a law enforcement perspective. So I welcome you. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to watching with you as we learn from those in our senior citizen community about how we can improve policing in San Mateo.
I know I'm angry now because I feel that our society is letting us down, is not taking care of the people it should be taking care of.
One of the things that's very important to me is trying to make people understand us culturally, traditionally, in the challenges that we come across.
Have we had experience with the police? Unfortunately, yes. My husband has Alzheimer's, and he was diagnosed in 2015. In 2017, he had an altercation with the police department, with several police officers. A very good Samaritan called thinking that we were having a domestic altercation, and my husband was very upset when the police approached him, and one thing led to another. Arthur ended up on the ground, and he has a scar today that reminds me every morning of the incident. He was taken down to McGuire facility in Redwood City, stayed there 2 days, and a year later, and $10,000, the judge said that his felony charge was dismissed and that he wished me luck. So I suppressed all of it because Arthur knew nothing. He didn't understand why he was going to court so frequently. Our attorney wanted to press charges, and I said no. Emotionally, I wasn't ready for that. And so I just sat on it. And the other thing, quite frankly, I didn't want any retaliation from police officers. I mean, that's the fear that I think many people of color have. So I sat on it until recently when I saw George Floyd and I saw the knee in his throat. And I said, you know, that could have been Arthur. And it's time for me to say something. And so I talked to our councilwoman, Lee, and she set up a meeting with the chief, Barberini. And we had a wonderful dialogue about the incident, about what I wanted and hoped would happen. And one thing has led to another. I didn't realize it was going to mushroom so quickly, but I'm glad that it has. And so that was the major incident and the only incident that Arthur and I have been involved in to a serious degree with the police department. What I'm able to do now as a result of my interaction with the police department, and still there are people who are saying, "You're doing what with the police department?" And after I tell my story and how we've been able to move this to the next level, they listen. And so this is a beginning step of what I hope will be a continuum of trainings, of accountability, of moving back into the community so the community feels extremely comfortable with our law enforcement.
The things I think that would help to close the gap between law enforcement and the community is more accessibility, more involvement. And we have observed we've spent some time doing stuff in North Central, and we've observed the San Mateo Police Department doing great work down there with the youth groups and the young people, and with sports and a rugby team. And when we go to meetings down there, community meetings down there, someone from the police department is always there trying to make things better, and that's a real plus. I think in general you guys have a great reputation in this community.
I had a nephew who died in his sleep at 22. So we get the call from my sister, and she's frantic. We're running over. We don't know what's going on. And while we were in there trying to straighten up her place, the police came in, a detective came in, and they said, "No, you can't touch anything." And they were trying to take whatever evidence, because we had no idea what he had died from in his sleep. And so I stayed during the whole time while they were there investigating, stayed until it was time for them to bring the body bag out. So a police officer who ended up being a detective, but at the time, no, he was a detective at the time, was so nice. I mean, everybody was nice. He was so nice and comforting, and they had to ask questions. Some I didn't know. My sister was frantic and couldn't answer them. And so I remember, I guess I must have given him my name and my address. So the very next day, that same detective knocked on my door. He had a plant, and he said, "I just want to give it to your sister." Because he said, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a son." And I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my God. So anyway, that really, really made a difference. And I ended up sending a long letter of accommodation, just I don't know what they're human, but I never thought of that. He said, he had a 2-year-old, I think. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a son. So please just give my condolences and make sure your sister gets his plant.
I have experienced physical abuse. It did not get past my door. Police came. It was all very dramatic, but yeah. So I know what it is to be afraid. And I was very happy somebody called the police.
Seniors are very vulnerable for a number of reasons, and many live alone, and their only communication may be a phone call from a neighbor or a child, grandchild, but maybe once a day, if that. And so as a result, they may be a great target for an unsavory individual who could be their neighbor. Actually, could be someone right there, or someone in a trusting role.
I know you guys need to be ready for anything that happens, but sometimes when you are wearing all that hardware, you look like a RoboCop, and you look a little scary and intimidating. So I wonder if, when that, in situations when that's not necessary, if it would make a less threatening image.
I think that there are still some gaps in the services between law enforcement and our seniors. And I think that that's a lot because of historical implications and the seniors that are left in the city of San Mateo are feeling for the most part that if I don't do anything, law enforcement's not going to bother me.
I got an email saying my nephew was in England someplace and needed money, and of course I called my sister and said, "What's this about?" And she said, "It's a scam." So, well, if someone is being taken advantage of, whether it's physically or financially, I would hope they would have the good sense to talk to someone. If not the police, a good friend, a church person, someone who could guide them in the right direction. But for instance, if you're talking about physical abuse, you might be afraid that it would just get worse. I mean, it's no different from any kind of violence within the family.
We all know that if it's an emergency, we call 911. A lot of times, older people are a little nervous about when they should call 911 and when they shouldn't. And so if it were easier to make a phone call that wasn't an emergency and ask a question in a sort of a non-critical, where you could ask a stupid question and no one would laugh out loud, I think that would be a plus.
Do I need to boot up the computer and go to the website and check it all out? Or do I have a bright yellow sheet like this hanging on my refrigerator with the 6 most likely phone numbers I might need, where I had, I mean, if I've got time to use the website, then I'm probably not acute. But what happens when I'm acute, when something needs to happen right now? I know there is a push to move more things out of the police purview and into social work, something of that sort. That, for instance, you were talking about Alzheimer's people. Well, having policemen deal with a person with Alzheimer's is probably outside the scope of their job or their training. So some way in which there's got to be a middle ground. Law enforcement, as we talked about in the city of San Mateo, is young. They're 30s and 40s. That's good. You want energetic policemen with good vision and hearing and whatnot to be running the store. But that doesn't mean they know anything about senior citizens. They don't, maybe they have a grandmother or grandfather and they have some sense there. But I think that if they're going to interact with the elderly, they need to learn something about how to do it appropriately. And as I said, old people are not going to be nice little old ladies. They're going to be, I've seen some pretty raunchy old ladies, I wouldn't want to meet on a dark corner. Take opportunities to talk to the elderly. If you have extended families and you have some old folks in your extended families, they may not be your favorite person to talk to, but make an effort. Talk to them. Ask them how they feel, similar to what you're doing now. Get to know what old people are like. And keep in mind, you're not immune. You're going to be old. We hope you're going to be old. That's the best place to be.
I love living in San Mateo for a number of lots of reasons. One of them is I'm proud of our police department, of the work you do in North Central, of the efforts that you make to involve the community, and I think you guys are terrific.
I feel hopeful about law enforcement today in the city of San Mateo. I can't speak for any other city, but I think that a door has been open for discussion and respect for each other's understanding and of a situation and what has to happen, what are some of the barriers, and so I just think that I will remain hopeful until something happens that I feel otherwise.
My name is Greg Jaguar. I'm currently a inspector with the DA's office in San Mateo County, specializing in elder abuse. My job specifically is really to bring solutions and resources to the community and to the cases that come into our office. So work in partnership with police departments, aging adult services, public guardian, community, to find out what is that best resource, what is that best solution. There's a variety of cases that we all get through, and when they talk about elder or dependent adult abuse is what we're looking at. So there's neglect cases. They can be general neglect or specific neglect. They can be physical abuse cases, financial abuse cases, whether it's from a stranger, as we all have heard from a variety of scams, via them from IRS or Social Security scams, or even romance scams that are very common. And also from people in a trusted position with that elder that eventually take advantage of that person. And it could be someone who's actually defrauding them, but it could be someone who's misappropriation, who's in a position of trust and misappropriates those person's funds. Many of our seniors in San Mateo County are sometimes house rich but cash poor and living on Social Security. So they look, you would assume that, hey, this person has a lot of money, look at their house, look where they live, but they're really just living on Social Security and they need help. So they bring someone in to assist them with that, and that person takes advantage of that position of trust. People, especially our seniors that are getting lonely, they're getting more and more tech savvy. They're on the internet more, especially for the people that are getting very lonely and they don't have a lot of friends left. So a lot of the friends have passed on, or like I said before, the family has moved away. And then they become vulnerable to suggestion. And during that time, they'll see a financial opportunity that just seems too good to be true. Well, it is too good to be true. The IRS scam, they look very, very believable. Hey, we've got a problem here. You need me to make this payment immediately. You need to wire me this money. The purchasing gift cards to pay off these particular debts, and or just simply wiring money. And we've seen that quite often in romance scams through Match.com. And I don't mean to bring up that particular site, but romance scams and contact they've made on the internet, they believe that they have remember this person's very vulnerable. They bring get a personal connection with someone they never met, or they believe that they're in love, they're going to have this long-term relationship, and then they slowly start asking for money, for loans, for investments, and they start wiring that money and transferring it away. If you are on the internet, as we all know, don't click on these random emails that you're getting. If you didn't solicit that email and it's not expected, don't respond to it. And then contact directly. If you get something you think is from the bank that wasn't expected, don't click on anything they're sending you. Go to your bank, talk to them, or call them if you're unable to go there in person, and find out what's going on with this. There are people there that you can help you with this, even in today's time, which is a little bit more difficult to do things in person. And they're very successful. It's a billion-dollar industry, this fraud industry that's going on, and we're all victims of it. It's not just elderly people. We've all been victims of it. There's a lot of intervention tools that we can do or provide, but not if no one ever finds out about it. Victims are, you're talking about proud people like you and me, that we don't need help. We take care of other people. We're the ones that get called to help others. So suddenly they need help, and that's a difficult hurdle for them to get through. The other hurdle that's really difficult is that quite often it is a caregiver or a trusted partner or a loved one that has taken advantage of them. That is a very difficult thing for them to do. And just like a domestic violence case, sometimes our victims are going to protect our suspects. So they're not going to tell you exactly what happened and how it happened, or how that injury occurred, or the fact that, when they fell, they were left on the floor for hours, because who wants to admit that their son or daughter or their caregiver or someone else, someone they really trust, isn't taking care of them? And this, because that's a person that reflects on them, their decision making, and they're going to protect that suspect sometimes. So you have to read between the lines. You have to look at the totality of the circumstances, and you really got to take a little time to build that rapport and trust. It will come. You just have. But if you ask a simple question, say, "Hey, did you give him permission?" Well, yeah, but that might be the first response. But then, well, did you want them to take all the money out and buy cars and motorcycles for themselves? The answer to that question probably is, well, no. They were supposed to help me with my bills. I think the main advice I would give to seniors is to let them know that there are resources out there to help them, to reach out for help when they need it. Don't be afraid to do so. We all are going to need help at some point, so don't be afraid to that. Reach out to your friends, reach out to your loved ones. If something doesn't sound too good to be true, reach out to the important people in your life. If the important people in your life aren't available, contact your local police department, contact Aging and Adult Services, contact the DA's office. We're here to help. It's not just to report crimes. We're here to help in any way or fashion we can. So they're not bothering us, and that's our job. That's what we're here to do.
Hi, my name is Officer Marcelo Altward, and during my many years as a traffic officer, I've investigated numerous crashes involving our aging population. It is so important as an aging adult that you are mindful about your safety when walking about, and especially when being behind the wheel of a car. Your safety and the safety of others is paramount. One of the most common things we see when it comes to senior drivers is their ability to easily confuse the gas pedal for the brake pedal. You can imagine how scary this can be when our seniors are surprised by an increase in speed when they expect to be braking. And more often than not, these type of crashes are into structures or other vehicles. Medications can also be a big factor in a senior driver's ability to drive a vehicle safely. Many have medical emergencies like insulin imbalance or cardiac issues or some form of dementia, which can cause them to get lost or be inattentive. Vision or hearing problems can affect how we interpret our surroundings. As we age, there's an increase in the amount of medication we must take to regulate our health, many of which should not be taken when operating a vehicle. When it comes to elderly pedestrian safety, we found that most of our seniors are hit while crossing in a crosswalk. There are many factors involved here. One is the senior did not wait for the appropriate walk signal or check both ways before crossing the street. It is important all pedestrians to know that the intersections where there is a signal light with a walk hand stop signal, that you understand the walk hand sign is for the pedestrians and the color signal light is for the vehicle. Many pedestrians walk on a green light even though the hand signal is red. While green means go, that is for the car. You need to wait until the walk hand signal turns to the white portion where the pedestrian can walk. Anytime you cross the street, whether signal or not, you need to look left, then right, then left again before crossing the street. Keep your head and eye up so you can react to cars. Conversely, cars can see you. And as we tend to age, our reaction becomes a little bit slower. And unfortunately, this can cause frustration and impatience for the drivers who are about to make a turn in front of you. Regardless, make sure that you are doing the safety appropriately, and the driver makes sure that you are also watching for pedestrians in the roadway. If you tend to travel by foot, make sure you wear bright colored clothing so you can be seen, especially at night. Carry identification and wear medical alert bracelet. If you have a medical issue, public safety officers should be aware of, and make sure that you're using necessary tools needed to walk safely, like a cane, glasses, or a hearing aid. Avoid distractions like listening to the radio or using any kind of electronic device. You should solely focus on crossing the street safely. For more safety tips, review the following, and we encourage you to have a frank discussion with your loved ones about their ability to walk and drive safely.
There's been a lot of talk recently about redirecting funding from police to social workers in order to better deal with those with mental health or intellectual or developmental disabilities. What's your take on this issue? And based on your answer, how would you address the need for an immediate police response, especially when someone is a danger to himself or herself or others?
We do need people who that is their only job and their specific job to address mental health issues or whatever other situations that are, because, and the other thing is that there are so many different disabilities that we, you can't, possibly know them all or know how to deal with it perfectly as somebody who is a professional in that specific field, can. So I think Paula said, it's not that we're going to completely have you guys out of a job. That's not it at all. You're very valuable. We do need you. We have emergencies that we need to have addressed, by law enforcement. But again, leaving specific issues and situations to people who are the experts in that field.
I just wanted to say that it also goes on the other side where you need to be thoughtful about who you hire in terms of being your mental health person. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've seen a big array of skills in this field, and not everybody is fit for this kind of situation where there's a lot of tension, a lot of stress, a lot of adrenaline happening. You have to find the right fit for a police department as well. Not just anybody who has a history of, working with the disability community or in mental health.
Post oversees all police officer training and standards in the state of California. And Post, I know, solicits this kind of feedback, and they actually look to experts to train police officers at a certain standard for the entire state. So Officer Bennett, can you tell us a little bit about what training we get as police officers in just a basic police academy, and then what we've done here at San Mateo to help deal with situations like the ones that we're hearing, or working with people with disabilities in general?
So I'll go through the basic chronology maybe of our training. It starts in the police academy, which is a 6.5-month academy. There's a whole learning domain based on just dealing with or working with people with disabilities. They're called LDs, learning domains. It's learning domain number 37. The entire one is dedicated to just that. But that's a classroom training. After 18 years, it's interesting to hear some of the things. I'd say I'm very well trained in dealing with it now, but most of the training has been kind of on the street. But in San Mateo County, I think we're way ahead of it. So after the classroom training in the police academy, San Mateo officers within their first year of employment attend the crisis intervention training. This is something that is put on by our county. And it's not just classroom. It's scenario based. It's a lot of people from the community come in and present to the officers. So it's a lot of kind of hands-on, real deal training and dealing with mental health. San Mateo, that's just the training, and again the ongoing training, the Alzheimer's trainings that we were just that we just got to take. I agree that was extremely valuable. And Gloria, if you had some part of that, I appreciate that. Police officers not only have the experience on the street and the training in the classroom, but a lot of us have personal experience. Police are necessary in a lot of situations, but there's so many situations where a clinician or some other emergency response would be better or more appropriate. San Mateo County kind of we have a workaround for that. We have the SMART program with the San Mateo County Mental Health Response Team. And it's a team of their paramedics who are specially trained to work with people in mental crisis or people in crisis and ones that we're often called to, where we get there and instantly recognize this is going to be a SMART call. They drive an SUV, they come out, they're dressed like paramedics, they're much more unassuming. The police uniform is taken out of that factory is taken out. And it's easier for us, it's easier for the person in crisis, and it's a great solution the county has. San Mateo and a couple of other cities in the county are the first to be looking at actually bringing on a clinician full-time to work at the police department. And that would be a resource similar to SMART, where we would call them out. But obviously even the clinician's qualifications are far beyond those of a police officer or a paramedic. So we do have a very specialized team of crisis negotiators. It's a position in the department, like a specialty, like detective or anything else, where you would apply for it. If you're chosen, you're sent to very specialized training, a few weeks out of the city, where your job full time is training to deal with people in mental crisis. The team, we're all trained to work in every role. There's a primary negotiator, a secondary negotiator. We have people doing intelligence for us, so we can learn about how to best help this person. It's a very specialized team of people who are trained further to work with people in crisis.
Officers always strive to do their best. Sometimes they encounter situations more suited for social workers, like dealing with mental health crisis calls, which is why we have crisis intervention teams. CIT programs teach law enforcement officers how to safely de-escalate mental health crisis situations. In fact, law enforcement agencies that have CIT programs in place have reported as much as an 80% decrease in officer injuries during mental health crisis situations. Not only do CIT programs educate officers, they also bring together community members and mental health care providers to offer convenient options for treatment and to reduce the number of repeated calls for police service, saving officers valuable time. Take the next step in helping your community better respond to mental health crisis calls. Learn more about CIT programs by visiting NAMI.org/CIT.
First of all, it's really important to realize that like somebody with PTSD is not in control of their response when they're triggered. Like if you have a fight or flight response, you're going to have a fight or flight response. If you've had treatment and you've been in therapy and you've learned coping skills, then you can come to a place where you can get yourself under control. But like that is not the time to be expecting people to even be able to listen to your commands, never mind obey them, or, you know, or if you take someone with Alzheimer's that's just confused and doesn't know, or you take someone with a developmental disability that just is trying to even figure out what's going on and what you want from them. So I think the most important thing is to stop and think and look at the situation, talk to the people around. People watch too much TV and movies and think that a PTSD triggered person is gonna, you know, be a Vietnam vet that's gonna, you know, start shooting at everybody or something like that. When actually your most common PTSD victim is a woman who's been sexually assaulted. Your most common PTSD response is not necessarily fight. It could be flight, it could be freeze. You have to be the adult in the room. So you have to have a different mindset, and I think that's where some of the problem comes in. Sometimes people have guns, and sometimes violence is going down, and you need a crisis intervention, and you need to, draw weapons, and you need to react quickly. But a lot of times, all you need to do is stop, ask what's going on, ask what do you need. Why are you freaking out? Is there something that we can do to get a statement out of you? Family members, what is going on? Why did he run away? Is he dangerous, or is he just oppositional? What works with this person?
We deal a lot with care homes or people who are conserved and things of that sort. They're often victims of sexual assault, of financial crimes, being taken advantage of, and just so many disturbing ways.
Well, one of the things that got brought up in our abuse roundtable group from somebody who had worked in a lot of the care homes, that sometimes as a behavioral modification, component, people will threaten residents with, "I'll call the police if you don't eat all of your peas," or, they use the police as a threat in so many situations. And so it's already, going against any officer who's going to show up, because instantly that person's going to be afraid and have all kinds of thoughts going through their mind that they're in trouble. One of the things, and I don't know if you guys still do this sort of thing, is just, actually go into a community setting and just introduce yourself and get to know people, and they'll see you as an ally and someone they can rely on, rather than an ally to the person who's actually hurting them.
Just last month, I presented to 40 kids who have Down syndrome, and we talked for, I think, 2 hours, and they got to know me. And so experiences like that, regular experiences, and then when we're past COVID, coming out to coffee with a cop or sitting down and having a meal with us and allowing us to break bread with you, I think stuff like that, I think, helps a lot.
I just wanted to suggest that we re-inform people of their rights and give them back that part of their power that I know a lot of us are very dependent on other people for our care and our supplies and whatever else there is in our life, and that sometimes takes away a piece of our independence, a piece of our ability to know that we have rights and that we are powerful. So maybe that could be part of it, like helping people create some sort of emergency plan in the event that they encounters a situation that they're uncomfortable with or that is abusive, that they could have something to fall back on.
There are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot out there now because it is the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And in fact, California law has even stronger protections for people with disabilities. You can go on the website of Disability Rights California or other disability rights organizations. You do have the right to accommodations, like in public places and housing and things like that. And that's another place where we see police involvement is, businesses or even public agencies will call the police because somebody is there that is acting out, and they decide because they have a mental illness and that they have to call the police, and it goes south. But I think a lot of it is just realizing that people with disabilities are people. The fact that curb cuts were required was a big, event, and yet now people use them for strollers and all kinds of things besides wheelchairs. A lot of these things that we fight because they're the unknown and because we think that that's for other people have actually been beneficial to all of society. So I would say, be aware of your rights, talk to disability rights attorneys about your rights. There's a lot on the internet. Be willing to enforce them. And when you're hearing people say things, and that was another thing I wanted to say about the people with disabilities as victims, especially people with major mental health issues, they're never believed, and they're often victimized because they're never believed. But think about it, what better victim do you have than somebody who will never be believed?
You mentioned rolled curbs. We're going to switch gears a little bit. For Likia, in the past, you've worked with us, with the San Mateo Police Department, to promote education when it comes to disabled parking, education and enforcement. As someone in a wheelchair, can you tell the audience why it is so important for drivers not to block or park in a disabled parking spot, or even across rolled curbs or in a handicap access ramp or on the street corners?
One of my favorite subjects to talk about. It's so frustrating. So we have our vehicles that are all accommodated for our needs. Some of us have ramps to come out of the side or come out of the back, and we need that extra space to be able to get out of our cars. Some of us don't necessarily have a ramp, but we have a manual chair that we break down and throw in the back and put back together, and then some of us have walkers and other mobility devices. So it's what it does is it prevents us from fully participating in our community, and it's just flat out disrespectful. For every 25 spots we get one. So in a parking lot of that many spots, if there aren't any others for people who are able-bodied, then they can use one that is maybe a little further, but just don't use our spots. Again, it's 1 out of 25 parking spots. And it takes a while. It also is time-consuming for law enforcement to have to come out and write a citation. You know, it's like that time could have been utilized for something that's a little bit more pressing. Just be mindful. Just like you're just gonna run in for a second, that prevents us the ability to do the same.
Most parking violations are $25-$30. A handicap violation is in the $300-$350 range. So when I put that little ticket on the windshield, there's some satisfaction that person thinks, oh, I'm getting a $20 ticket. Like, wait till you get that one in the mail. The fine is the same as if you park in the spot or if you park in the spot next to it, which is the striped area. So that's one thing to point out. And then you talked about rolled curbs. San Mateo has a lot of narrow streets in the north end, on the east side. And you have to realize those sidewalks, I understand you want to protect your car and your rear view mirror, but those sidewalks need to also be available to people who are in wheelchairs or other mobility devices to get by. So that's something to think about in San Mateo, the road curb thing. I come out all the time and someone's parked a very expensive car all the way up against the bushes on the sidewalk, just because they're afraid of being sideswiped.
So we have a text to 911 for anyone that needs to, and this is just not actually for those who are disabled. These are for anyone who might be in a situation where they can't call, and they can go ahead and text 911 to us. That goes to our dispatch service, and then from there they receive it, and they receive a text that comes out, and they can reply in a text as well. I think this is fantastic. Actually, before this, just really quick, I actually had a 911 call from a family who was deaf, and all we got was not audible. And when I went out there, we weren't sure where we were going to, what was happening. Luckily, we went out there and they had to explain to me, and I was able to write down, and that's how we communicated. But this right here is fantastic, to be able to know what the needs of our citizens are. And they get our dispatch gets it right away. The one thing I did go to dispatch, and they said the one thing that they ask, if please, if you're going to use this feature, say what you need, but make sure you put an address attached to that as well in your first text. And that's so important, because if they don't have an address, they don't know where they're going to go to. We have a GPS location, but that has an error on or I think there's a certain range that that the GPS location will pinpoint, but it won't get exact location. And so if you all can do that, that would be fantastic.
Officer Basurdo, most people don't know about this, but do you mind telling us, if you don't mind, telling the audience about the disability that you mentioned earlier on when we first started the episode?
Yeah, I'm actually an amputee. My left lower below my knee was amputated. I was in a traffic accident heading home. I fell asleep. I woke up right before I was going to hit a vehicle, swerved, but which caused my car to roll over. Because of that, I had significant injuries, internal injuries. I actually severed the artery in my right forearm. They were awesome doctors, medical staff, and they were able to get that back. And now I'm back to the force, you know. And so I'm super excited and happy. But I think, and just to touch on it, I know a lot of the panelists that talk about having people see who you are. And I think that's so important. This happened just a few years ago. And I'd like to say too that, you know, I'd like to be Officer Carlos Basurdo with an amputated leg, but I want to be me. And I know my disability is who I am too, as well. And I embrace it.
The City of San Mateo is soliciting feedback by a survey from the community on disability accessibility. As I mentioned before, it's the final step in a year-long process. So please go to cityofsanmateo.org/ADA for links to the survey for individuals and organizations that serve people with disabilities. Again, the survey is going to close January 15th, 2021. This series is going to continue throughout the year, and we have a lot of exciting plans for our future episodes. Be sure to follow us on our emergency alert platforms like Nixle, Nextdoor to find out what's happening in your neighborhood for timely and accurate information. And also on our social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Please visit us at sanmateopolice.org. Scroll through our police accountability page. There are a ton of videos, all of our Real Talk San Mateo series. This one will be on there too. And learn about the police department, how we're working hard to keep San Mateo safe.
Necesitamos que nuestra comunidad latina sea más abierta. Estamos aquí para ayudar, no para perjudicar. Necesitamos saber cuando cosas suceden. Si han sido víctimas de algún crimen o algo, necesitamos saber por muchas cosas, no nada más para ayudarles a ustedes o a las víctimas, sino también para saber qué es lo que está pasando en nuestra ciudad y cómo podemos hacer que nuestra comunidad sea más sana y más salva. So, es súper, súper importantísimo que sean abiertos con nosotros y que no tengan miedo. Estamos aquí para ayudar y nada más. Somos dos entidades súper diferentes, ¿no? Nosotros nos encargamos, como policía, nosotros nos encargamos de nuestra ciudad, que es ahorita San Mateo, ¿no? Encargamos de que todos en nuestra comunidad estén sanos y salvos. Lo que es IRS o inmigración, ellos se encargan de algo más como federal que tiene que ver con inmigración. Nuestros trabajos son totalmente diferentes. A nosotros no nos interesa si nuestra comunidad latina, como dicen, tienen papeles, no tienen papeles, el estatus inmigratorio. Nada de eso nos importa. A nosotros lo que nos importa es que los que viven en San Mateo estén sanos y salvos y estén protegidos. Entonces, aclarando un poquito más a lo de la pregunta anterior, como hispana y familia, y mis papás son inmigrantes, los dos son de México, y tengo mucha familia que ha llegado en los últimos años a este país y entiendo las dificultades como policía y como hispana. Me duele cuando escucho que nuestra comunidad no tiene miedo de hablarnos o tiene miedo de pedir ayuda. para eso estamos.
He tenido varias experiencias. He tenido unas que no han sido tan, tan buenas o tan positivas, pero también he tenido unas que han sido súper positivas. Creo que empezando con las experiencias que han sido en mi mente, que se grabaron en mi mente porque fueron cosas, fueron cosas que no eran muy serias. Por ejemplo, me paró la policía manejando. Yo soy humana, ¿verdad? Yo creo que a todos nos dan nervios cuando vamos manejando y la policía está detrás de nosotros. Yo soy abogada y aún así me dan nervios. Y me ha tocado que me han parado, inmediatamente me han acusado de cosas que no son ciertas y pues hablando se entiende uno, ¿verdad? Pero sí, me ha tocado que empiezan de una manera bien agresivos con sus preguntas y la verdad sin tener razón por la cual, en mi ocasión, la razón que me dieron por la cual que me habían parado, para mí no fue una excusa para pararme, pero en sí no pasó nada, se dieron cuenta de que yo estaba embarazada y no iba tomada, pero de todos modos fue una experiencia que sí me grabó porque yo no, o sea, no, no había hecho nada que hubiera tenido razón para pararme, pero eso fue hace muchos años, hace como 5 años. Más reciente, me tocó que alguien llamó a la policía porque mis hijos estaban jugando en la calle en estos tiempos de COVID y vino a la policía, es una policía mujer que se llama, creo, el apellido es Peña, y nos tocó, me dio mucho gusto porque cuando llegó a la casa, ella llegó muy amable, para que los niños no tuvieran miedo. Ella permitió que se subieran a su patrulla, encendieron las luces, a mis hijos les dio stickers. O sea, fue una experiencia para ellos muy importante de tener porque yo no quería que ellos le tuvieran miedo a la policía, y creo que experiencias así son muy importantes. Son esas ocasiones donde hay mucha oportunidad de hacer esas relaciones con comunidad.
Hablar por ese oficial, porque yo no estaba ahí. Pero la policía aquí en San Mateo, o cualquier policía en el estado de California, tiene que tener una razón para parar a una persona. No es solo para parar a una persona, tiene que tener una razón. No es como, perdón, Rosy, pero yo no es una excusa. Tal vez vieron que, yo también me pongo nervioso también cuando la policía me pone atrás, pero tal vez hizo un movimiento que la policía miró que era malo y quería ver si ella estaba tomada. Pero como yo digo, yo no estaba ahí, pero sí tenemos que tener razón, porque la gente en los Estados Unidos tienen derechos, y no podemos parar así, no podemos parar a la gente así. Hablando con los niños y todo eso, y el oficial que vino y habló con los niños y dejó que ellos entraran en la patrulla, así hacemos todo, queremos hacer eso, porque no queremos que los niños tengan miedo, porque cuando yo era niño, mis papás me dicen, mira, si no te comportas bien, vamos a llamar a la policía. Y eso me asustaba. Eso es mejor que los papás no digan eso, porque es algo negativo, contra la policía. Y siempre tenemos que hablar con los niños positivos y todo eso, pero Yo creo que Lupe quería decir algo.
Oh, no. Los dos comentarios de Rosy y de la persona en el público, de que tienen miedo, a veces llega la policía detrás y los para y luego empiezan a hablar con uno. Yo he sido policía aquí en San Mateo por 15 años y si me llega a parar un policía, es más, ni que me pare, con que esté al lado de mí, empiezo yo con el corazón latiendo súper rápido. Es normal, es normal. Mi único consejo es respirar, tener calma. Si piden la licencia, den la licencia. Si piden la aseguranza, la registración del carro, denla. Ellos les van a explicar cuál fue la razón del stop o del parar. Pero creo que todos en San Mateo somos muy profesionales. A lo mejor hay veces que unos son más cortos que otros, pero las intenciones son buenas, ¿no? Y estamos aquí para asegurar de que en el camino todos estén seguros. Imagínense si los policías no pararan a la gente y no dieran multas. Imagínense todos los carros speeding, personas que no paran para el stop. Entonces, desafortunadamente y desafortunadamente tenemos un trabajo que hacer. Mi único consejo es, sean ustedes, cálmense, respiren. A nosotros también nos da miedo.
Disculpen, ¿puedo hacer una pregunta?
Sí,
para
por
las
favor.
personas que tal vez han pasado una experiencia negativa donde quisieran ellos darle saber al departamento de policías, porque la verdad es que solo así mejoramos, ¿verdad? Sabiendo, teniendo feedback de alguna experiencia, aunque tal vez no llegue al nivel de un delito, pero es importante saber esas experiencias. ¿Cuál es el modo de cómo la gente pueden poner no quiero decir quejas, pero dónde pueden compartir esas experiencias con ustedes y que algo se haga de eso?
Muchas gracias, Rosy. ¿Sí? Por favor, adelante, oficial.
La manera más fácil de darnos a entender ciertos a lo mejor comentarios que hagamos o maneras de mejorar es llamar al departamento de policía. Llamar al departamento de policía, hablen con un supervisor, expliquen qué fue lo que sucedió, qué fue lo que se dijo, para que ese supervisor o supervisora pueda actuar apropiadamente y por poco, de perdida, dar algún tipo de training, ¿no? De entrenamiento para decir, hey, mira, pasó esto, pasó lo otro, ten en cuenta esto, ten en cuenta lo otro, porque, Rosy, estoy de acuerdo contigo. Si no sabemos las cosas que a lo mejor estemos haciendo mal, ¿cómo nos vamos a mejorar, no? Entonces, esa es la manera más fácil. Incluso también si quisieran, tenemos muchas plataformas en la media social. No es necesariamente la mejor manera de dar a luz los problemas, pero también lo pueden hacer por la media social. Pero para más fácil y para que haya más atención al problema o al comentario, llamen directamente y hablen con un supervisor. El tema de las pandillas no es algo nuevo, ¿no? Las pandillas han existido por añales, estamos hablando cientos de años, que hay historia acerca de cómo las pandillas se han formado. En los últimos años en San Mateo, lo que nosotros vemos más que nada es que los norteños y los sureños, a los papás que están viendo, a la comunidad que está viendo, un poquito de educación acerca de ciertas pandillas que nosotros vemos, son los sureños y los norteños. Y otra cosa, que no nomás son pandillas hispanas, las pandillas corren en todo tipo de persona, ¿no? Pero sí, últimamente estamos viendo un poquito de actividad entre pandillas con los sureños y los norteños, como por ejemplo, chicos, chicas que utilizan mucho el color azul. Es un color dirigido a lo que es un sureño. Los que utilizan ropa roja o mucha ropa roja son los que van más a la pandilla norteña. también tienen números asociados, ¿no? Que el 13 para los sureños y el 14 para los norteños. Les explico yo esto porque a veces uno como papá, uno siempre piensa lo mejor de nuestros hijos, porque claro, son nuestros hijos y queremos siempre lo mejor, pero ¿cómo se dice? Experiencia personal y también de policía. A veces creo que uno como papá cometemos el error de no abrir bien los ojos y ver las señas para tratar de hacer una interveniencia o para tratar de cambiar ciertos pasos que a lo mejor nuestros hijos o hijas estén tomando. Entonces, a los papás que están escuchando, si tienen ustedes alguna preocupación, estamos aquí también para ayudar en eso. No vamos a tener todas las respuestas, ni tenemos el poder de arreglar todo, pero sí tenemos ideas. Lo más importante acerca de las pandillas, especialmente cuando nos están afectando, es que tengamos esa comunicación. Si tienen preocupación por los hijos, hablar de eso, agarrar ayuda. Si estamos hablando de pandillas en nuestras comunidades donde ustedes están viendo que algo no está bien, se están juntando ciertos grupos, a lo mejor los miran que están fumando drogas o están tomando en la calle, no sé, cualquier cosa, les repito, es súper importante que nos llamen, que tengan esa confortez, que puedan llamar y hablar con nosotros y explicar, mira, yo vivo en tal calle, esto es lo que estoy viendo, esto es lo que está pasando, porque eso nos ayuda a nosotros a saber qué es lo que está pasando en nuestra ciudad. Siempre que hago yo, que hablo yo con la comunidad, les digo, ¿qué es lo que pasa cuando el policía pasa por cualquier calle, no? Si uno va manejando y mira un policía, inmediatamente se pone el cinto, suelta el teléfono, se comporta todo bien. Entonces nosotros no siempre vemos todo y por eso es muy importante que ustedes como personas que viven en la comunidad, que tengan esa comunicación con nosotros para que nosotros podamos ayudar a tener vecindades más sanas y más salvas y más safe, para que nuestros hijos crezcan y puedan jugar en la calle sin miedo y sin preocupaciones.
Ya lo mismo. Yo he vivido en tantas ciudades, en Oakland, San Francisco, y yo viví en una parte que habían muchos pandilleros, habían balazos, gente vendiendo droga, y yo hablé con los vecinos, I'm like, ¿qué está pasando? Que la policía no pasa, esto. Todos nosotros habíamos como 10 vecinos que cuando miramos algo, llamemos. Hablamos con toda la gente vía text y dice, ya vieron eso, tenemos que llamar. Pum. Y el capitán de esa área no sabía nada que estaba pasando en esa área. No sabía que tenían un problema. Ya, es la misma cosa aquí. Si hay un problema en su calle o en su neighborhood, ya, tienen que llamar, ya. Y si no quieren dar nombre, ok, no quieren dar nombre. Pero es mejor que ahí tenemos esa llamada que hay gente allá tomando, o están fumando, o un grupo que solo tienen rojo o tienen azul. Así podemos ayudar, ya, porque ahí podemos poner todos los oficiales que trabajan en esa área, que sepan que esa área hay mucha actividad y ellos pueden actuar contra eso, ¿ya? Y contra, los papás, nosotros entendemos que tenemos que trabajar 2, 3 trabajos, ¿ya? Y sus hijos están ahí en la casa y nadie tiene que supervisar a ellos, ¿ya? Nosotros entendemos eso, pero también los papás tienen que hablar y tienen que ver si tienen mucho rojo, tienen mucho azul, ¿ya? Entonces tienen que entender eso, ¿ya?
Recuerden, somos un vecindario compuesto al 99% de latinos y sobre todo que solamente hablábamos español. Entonces, PCRC vino, tocó puertas, hasta que yo fui una de las que les abrí. Y les abrí, honestamente, porque estaba enfadada de que me tocaran la puerta. Pero empecé a involucrarme, empecé a conocer los programas que PCRC nos traía, las oportunidades que nos traía para que nosotros mismos conociéramos a nuestros propios vecinos, porque no los conocíamos. Entonces, fue un proceso largo, tuvimos la oportunidad de conocernos y también de reconocer nuestros muchachos pandilleros, los que teníamos, los que tenemos, no son muchachos malos en ningún momento, tienen familias, tienen papás, hermanos. Entonces, entender eso era muy difícil. Nosotros decíamos, cuando llegó el momento que la policía se involucró, nos dijo, nosotros podemos hacer que ellos se vayan, podemos llamar a los dueños de los apartamentos y pedirles que tomen en cuenta la seguridad del vecindario. Pero decíamos, ¿y a dónde se van a ir? ¿A dónde se van a ir estas familias? Entonces, involucrarnos con las familias, con los papás de esas personas que nos traían problemas a nuestro vecindario, fue muy bueno. Aprendimos a convivir. Incluso hicimos días de limpieza donde los oficiales venían con sus shorts y camisetas y venían a ayudar, no venían a hacer su trabajo de policía, venían como voluntarios. Entonces fue una interacción muy bonita. Empezamos a hacer los cambios que necesitábamos. Incluso esos muchachos pandilleros, tengo muy presente que uno de ellos, uno que se decía era líder, un día que nos vio limpiando, él llega, nos ofrece guantes a todos, sin decir nada, solamente nos da guantes, nos da bolsas para la basura y él se pone junto con nosotros a limpiar y ayudar a que nuestros niños pintaran el graffiti que ellos mismos habían puesto. Entonces, lógico, los tiempos han cambiado, muchas familias se han movido del lugar. Tenemos otro nuevo ambiente, otro nuevo resurgimiento, pero lo que se ha quedado, esa integración, ese sentido de comunidad, sigue aquí, ese respeto por las personas, ese respeto por los miembros de esas pandillas, porque como les digo, no son chicos malos, son chicos haciendo cosas inapropiadas que le están perjudicando, son malas decisiones que están tomando. Seguimos en contacto con el departamento de policía, hasta ahorita no nos ha fallado, tenemos esa comunicación, pero ahorita por los tiempos de COVID y el ambiente político con el que vivimos, ha hecho un poco difícil otra vez la comunicación, especialmente con las nuevas familias que tenemos. Entonces, es trabajo por hacer, pero ese sentido no se ha perdido. Ni el departamento de policía nos ha dicho, no te vamos a ayudar, no vamos a ayudar a esta gente, ni la comunidad ha dicho, no, hasta aquí la dejamos. Simplemente es el proceso de otra vez volver a establecer esas relaciones y como dijeron al principio, no trabajamos con inmigración, no hacemos esto. El clima político que se vive es muy independiente del trabajo que nosotros hacemos. Primero que nada, somos humanos, representamos a un departamento de policía, pero para el bienestar de ustedes. Entonces, es trabajo por hacer, pero como les digo, el sentimiento de comunidad persiste y el respeto también.
Dos programas súper magníficos para tratar de cambiar los pasos de nuestra juventud, ¿no? A veces lo que yo miro cuando chicos y chicas empiezan a tomar decisiones inapropiadas y empiezan a ir por caminos equivocados, es a veces por falta de atención, a veces por falta de, como se dice, self-esteem, a veces estima baja, y en otras ocasiones porque no tiene nada que hacer. Cuando un joven no tiene nada que hacer, tiene tiempo para pensar en cosas que a lo mejor no son correctas. Entonces, HAL brinda muchos programas para niños, adolescentes y lo que son ya casi adultos, donde, como por ejemplo, tenemos programas como de Junior Giants, donde los jóvenes pueden jugar softball. El año pasado nos juntamos con todas las escuelas, las high schools, Oregon, Hillsdale y San Mateo, y empezamos a identificar chicos y chicas que estaban pasando por por momentos bajos y que necesitaban ese aliento para tratar de hacer más en las escuelas, para tratar de tomar mejores decisiones. Abrimos equipos de soccer en las 3 escuelas para los jóvenes, yoga, que es súper, súper bueno ahorita, ¿no? Para tener esa fortaleza mental y inner fortaleza. También tenemos programas para chicos donde esos programas normalmente los hacemos en el King Center, donde hacemos tipos de artes, en crafts, y muchos otros programas, ¿no? El chiste es de ocupar el tiempo de nuestra juventud con cosas positivas, acompañados con los policías de San Mateo. Acerca del programa GREAT, es un programa que yo fui School Resource Officer de las escuelas por 5 años, entonces yo tuve la oportunidad grandísima y fue algo súper emocionante poder ver cómo chicos crecen y cómo a veces chicos que están yendo por pasos que a lo mejor no deben, empiezan a recibir atenciones o recursos y empiezan a mejorar, a ir más a la escuela, a tomar mejores grados. Anyways, déjame, me voy otra vez al tema de GREAT. GREAT es una clase que hacemos donde enseñamos esta es para los jóvenes en middle school, del 6º año, donde los vamos a una clase una vez a la semana por 15 semanas y les enseñamos de muchas diferentes cosas. Hablamos un poquito de gangas para que tengan ellos en mente que, hey, esto existe y esto es lo que significa y esto puede ser malo porque te puede llevar a cosas que no e incluso puedes llegar a la cárcel. Pero también hablamos de lo que es el enojo, cómo controlar nuestro enojo, cómo tomar decisiones, cómo hacer metas o poner metas en mente y lograr estas metas. Hablamos de comunicación, aprendizaje, entonces hablamos de muchas cosas y ese programa pues les da la oportunidad a los chicos y chicas que miren algo diferente y no nomás de una maestra en las escuelas, sino de un policía que entra a la clase a ser maestro o maestra.
Si me dejas agregar algo, Aida, a lo que Lupe ha dicho.
Sí, por favor.
Solamente es para recalcar el programa PAL, porque nuestros milenios de ahora que viven en este vecindario, los mejores momentos que se le ofrecieron en ese tiempo de que teníamos mucha actividad de pandillas, fueron los momentos que PAL le brindó. Viajes a las nieves, movies, Giants Games, todos juntos, éramos como 40 personas, parecíamos hormiguitas caminando del vecindario al bus station, train station, pero todos juntos, todo gracias al programa PAL. Ellos provieron increíblemente a nuestros chicos, que ahora son milenios, pero que están eternamente agradecidos por estas oportunidades.
Que sí, gracias a los oficiales por todos sus esfuerzos y por compartir esa información. Aquí en el condado de San Mateo, específicamente en la Oficina de Asuntos Comunitarios, hemos estado desde el principio tratando de no solo tener recursos útiles que en nuestra página web, pero que también sean en el idioma y fáciles de entender para nuestra comunidad latina, porque sabemos que esos son momentos muy difíciles y lo último que quiere la gente estar haciendo es buscando de un lado para otro de todos esos recursos. Hemos creado un sitio web que contiene la información en un sitio y esta información está disponible en varios idiomas y tiene la opción uno de ver recursos, así es como se mira nuestro sitio web. Uno tiene la oportunidad de recibir recursos no solo de inmigración, pero también si yo necesito una despensa de alimentos, necesito saber qué recursos hay como yo, como empleado, cuáles son mis derechos laborales, si estoy sufriendo un desalojo, y recursos financieros. Nuestra comunidad de inmigrante quedó fuera, mucho de la comunidad de inmigrante quedó fuera del apoyo federal. Y esto fue muy triste, muy frustrante, y como respuesta, aquí en el condado de San Mateo se aprobó un fondo de ayuda para inmigrantes del condado de San Mateo. Y esto se ha sido extendido, se han aprobado otros 2 millones para este fondo de inmigrantes, y estos son específicamente para inmigrantes que viven en el condado de San Mateo y que no pudieron recibir fondos federales. Todavía están a tiempo para aplicar. Aquí les estoy mostrando el sitio web y también lo voy a poner en la página de comentarios de este enlace de Facebook Live, y los animo a que por favor, si califican para estos fondos, apliquen, porque esto no es un préstamo, esto no es dinero que se les va a cobrar después, no importa su estatus migratorio, esto es específicamente para familias que tienen bajos ingresos y que están batallando porque aunque tenemos las despensas de alimento, hay necesidades diferentes. Por ejemplo, yo necesito que comprar mi carro, por ejemplo, gasolina para el carro. Entonces, gastos muy únicos que como trabajadores esenciales, personas que están trabajando día a día, apoyando a nuestra comunidad, necesitan ese tipo de apoyo. Y nuestro programa también de servicios de inmigrante está aquí para apoyarlos. Tenemos recursos de donde hay abogados de inmigración, abogadas, recursos de organizaciones sin fines de lucro, y también los animamos a que se comuniquen con nosotros porque podemos darles información acerca de la carga pública. A veces escuchamos muchos rumores de que dicen, bueno, si usted obtiene cierto beneficio, le va a afectar su caso de inmigración y ya no va a poder recibir su residencia permanente, su ciudadanía. No haga caso a eso. Vaya a lugares como nuestra oficina, organizaciones acreditadas, a recibir una asesoría sobre eso, porque en estos momentos hay mucha información que no tiene las mejores intenciones, así que por favor les animo a que se empoderen, a que tengan la confianza de acercarse con nosotros, porque nosotros estamos dispuestos a contestarles ese tipo de preguntas. También hemos creado un boletín de recursos. Esto se puede recibir mensualmente a su teléfono, a su correo electrónico, y tiene recursos, lo más nuevo de los recursos sobre el COVID-19, y también tiene actualizaciones, por ejemplo, de las leyes, y esto va derechito a su correo electrónico, y depende de qué vecindario vive, a lo mejor ya recibió una copia en papel. Aquí en nuestro sitio web es donde también usted se puede inscribir para este boletín. Otro programa nuevo que acaba de salir son las subvenciones para los propietarios de pequeñas residencias. Esta oportunidad de aplicar para este dinero se va a acabar el 28 de octubre, pero si usted tiene una propiedad y su inquilino no la ha estado pagando debido al COVID-19, puede aplicar para un fondo, una subvención que no es un préstamo, o incluso aunque usted no tenga propiedad pero está teniendo problemas con eso, coméntele al arrendador, a la arrendadora de este programa, porque esto se puede aplicar por nuestra página que también les voy a compartir. Y si lo suyo no es estar en internet y prefiere hablar por teléfono, hay otras opciones. Puede llamar al 211, que es una línea que se ha creado para estar disponible las 24 horas del día, 7 días de la semana, donde usted puede hablar en su propio idioma para que le den información sobre los recursos del COVID-19, dónde se puede hacer la prueba. Y esto también puede estar en su propio idioma, como le digo. Y esto no tiene ningún costo y es disponible para cualquier persona aquí en el condado de San Mateo. Otro esfuerzo que estamos haciendo aquí en esta oficina es de la distribución de mascarillas, y las mascarillas reusables, ¿verdad? Porque a veces son caros estar compre y compre mascarillas, o sea, es un requisito y es algo muy importante para nuestra comunidad para detener la propagación. Y las mascarillas las estamos distribuyendo en cada ciudad del condado de San Mateo. Estamos también entregándolas en las despensas de comida, ¿verdad? Si ustedes ya están yendo, por ejemplo, al centro de comunidad Fair Oaks, ahí las vamos a estar entregando. Y nuestra meta es que todas las personas puedan tener una mascarilla y que la puedan usar, porque solamente usando la mascarilla es como vamos a detener esta propagación. Yo sé que es incómodo, pero es un sacrificio que tenemos que hacer, si no por nosotros y nuestra familia, pero por esa persona que tiene que estar trabajando día a día, que no puede tomarse un día, que tiene que estar exponiéndose a esto. Entonces, hay que hacer esto por todos como comunidad. Y también las pruebas. Ahora no hay excusa para no hacerse la prueba del COVID-19 si nuestro empleador no las está pidiendo, que ahora hay la oportunidad de hacer las pruebas y que tener resultados dentro de 48 horas. Me han platicado que se han hecho una prueba del COVID-19 en uno de los nuevos sitios que son móviles y como en 36 horas ya tuvieron resultados, así que es muy diferente, están tratando diferentes estrategias y les voy a compartir una de ellas que ya tiene un poquito más de tiempo, pero estas son de los sitios fijos, ¿verdad? Por ejemplo, si usted va al centro de eventos en la calle Saratoga, en San Mateo Event Center, ahí usted se registra y puede tomar la prueba. No le van a preguntar su estatus de migración, no le van a cobrar, no necesitas que tener nota del médico. Y estos están siguiendo, ¿verdad? Ya tienen un par de meses con estos sitios de prueba. Ahora algo nuevo que se está haciendo son los sitios de prueba COVID-19 en los vecindarios. Entonces, nuestros compañeros de organizaciones sin fines de lucro nos están apoyando con este esfuerzo. Van a lugares donde saben que las personas necesitan las pruebas y ahora hasta los niños de 5 años en adelante se pueden tomar esta prueba. Así que, y esta prueba no es tan enfadosa, por ejemplo, de que se tenga que uno tomar la prueba por medio de la nariz, pero es solamente una prueba por la boca y como le digo, sus resultados los puede recibir en su teléfono y no tiene dolor, o sea, es rápido, seguro. Y algo que quiero recalcar es que más número que tengamos posible de pruebas, más resultados negativos que tengamos, quiere decir que más pronto vamos a poder reabrir el condado y volver a la normalidad, a nuestra vida cotidiana y poder volver a abrazar a nuestros familiares, poder volver a tener esas reuniones que tanto queremos, pero por ahorita, por favor, apóyennos en no tener reuniones, ¿verdad? Fiestas, hay que tener conciencia de todo eso. Y si estamos aquí para servirles, ustedes se pueden contactar con nosotros por teléfono, les voy a compartir también nuestro sitio web y por las redes sociales tenemos página de Facebook, Twitter y Instagram. Nos puede seguir ahí también y estar viendo qué eventos tenemos, porque tenemos eventos como estos de Facebook Live o les podemos compartir donde van a tener talleres de inmigración también. Así que aquí para servirles, cualquier preguntita, no duden en acercarse a nosotros.
Nomás acerca del tema de la comunicación, Guillermina, se me afigura que tu clientela, mucha de tu clientela es hispana y te agradezco la ayuda en que tú les estás dando la información correcta. Te pido si tienes alguna otra idea para cómo asegurarnos de que los que no estén escuchando hoy día, que agarren esta información, porque como dije anteriormente y lo vuelvo a repetir, es súper importante que nosotros sepamos qué es lo que está pasando en nuestra ciudad, en nuestra comunidad, para poder ayudar. Entonces, a todos los que están aquí, no nomás panelistas, pero los que están escuchando, hablen de estos temas con sus familiares, con sus amigos, para que más de la comunidad latina sepa que están protegidos.
Claro que sí.
Muchas gracias a la oficial Mejía.
Y perdón, y que no tengan pena. Nosotros no mordemos. So, que no tengan pena. Que si tienen una pregunta y nosotros no estamos ocupados con una llamada o algo, que solo que pueden llamar, o si miran una policía en la calle, que lo paren y hagan esa pregunta. A mí muchas veces, hey, speak Spanish? Sí, yo sí hablo español. ¿Qué pregunta tienen? Y ahí se ponen más confortables con la policía. So, la gente que está escuchando, como Lupe dice, tienen que hablar. Si tienen preguntas, pregunten. Yo estoy abierto por... no sé si ustedes pueden poner mi nombre allá yo trabajo en la noche, yo estoy durmiendo en el día, pero si alguien tiene una pregunta, ellos pueden llamar, me pueden poner el nombre allí y yo estoy abierto a cualquier pregunta que ellos tengan. Gracias por todo, por estar aquí. esto es bueno para la comunidad, para los oficiales, para que nosotros podamos hablar con los otros oficiales y decirle cómo los hispanos de la comunidad se sienten ya contra la policía. So, es bien importante, haciendo esto. So, muchas gracias.
Y de mi parte, lo que dijo Arnaldo, muchas gracias a todos los que están escuchando. Para la gente que no está escuchando, para los que están escuchando, hablen de estos temas con los que conozcan, ¿no? Y yo trabajo durante el día, estoy trabajando durante la noche. Si tienen algún problema o alguna pregunta durante el día, es muy probable que van a terminar hablando conmigo. Y cosa más importante de todo lo que hemos platicado es el Departamento de Policía de San Mateo está aquí para ayudar a toda nuestra comunidad. No importa de qué color, de qué raza, de nada. Estamos aquí para ayudar a todos y con eso les pido que nos llamen si ocupan algo.